I came home a day early from a fishing trip to surprise my wife Beatrice. Instead, I found her in our bedroom, packing 40 years of marriage into black garbage bags while tears ran down her face. Downstairs, my daughter was popping champagne with Realtors celebrating the sale of the home I built with my own hands. They thought I was just a senile old man they could toss aside like yesterday's newspaper. They thought a piece of paper gave them the power to erase me. But they forgot one thing. I didn't just build this house, I designed the trapdoor underneath it. I am Elijah King, and this is how I taught my ungrateful children that you never bet against the architect. Before I tell you how I evicted my own daughter from the will and reclaimed my dignity, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect is a two-way street, even with your own flesh and blood. The drive back from the fishing cabin was supposed to be peaceful. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October, and the Georgia pines were just starting to turn that deep, burnt orange color that Beatrice loved so much. I was driving my 1998 Ford F-150. It was an old truck beaten up and rusted around the wheel wells, but the engine purred like a kitten because I took care of what I owned. That was the philosophy I lived by for 71 years. If you build it strong and you treat it right, it lasts. I had a cooler full of fresh trout in the back, and I was humming an old Sam Cooke song thinking about the look on my wife's face when I walked through the door a day early. Beatrice and I had been married for 42 years. We built our house on Lake Lanier from the ground up. I mean that literally. I am a retired architect, but back then I was just a young man with a drafting pencil and a dream. I poured the foundation myself. I framed the walls. I laid every single shingle on that roof. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was the physical manifestation of my love for my family. It was where we raised our only daughter, Vanessa. It was where I planned to take my last breath, looking out at the water. But as I turned onto the long gravel driveway that winded up the hill to our property, the hum in my throat died. There were cars in the driveway. Not just any cars. There was a silver Mercedes SUV that I knew belonged to my daughter, Vanessa, and right next to it was a flashy red Porsche that belonged to her husband, Brad. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Brad, my son-in-law. He was a man who wore loafers without socks and talked about synergy and leverage while living in a condo I helped them pay for. But it wasn't their cars that made my stomach turn. It was the other two vehicles. A black Lexus and a white BMW, both with magnetic signs on the doors. Elite Lakefront Realty. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Why were there realtors at my house? We weren't selling. We had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. This was our forever home. I parked the truck down the hill behind the old tool shed. I didn't want them to hear the engine. I wanted to see what was happening before I announced my presence. My instincts, the ones that had kept me alive growing up in tough neighborhoods and navigating the cutthroat world of construction, were screaming that something was wrong. I walked up the path quietly. My boots crunched softly on the autumn leaves. I approached the back porch, the one with the screened-in sunroom where Beatrice liked to drink her morning tea. The windows were open to let in the breeze. I heard laughter. It was loud, raucous laughter. The kind of laughter that sounds like breaking glass. It is a tear down honestly. Brad's voice drifted out through the screen. He sounded arrogant. He always sounded arrogant. The land is worth $3 million, but this structure, it is dated. It is. It screams 1980. I clenched my fists. Dated. He was talking about the hand-carved mahogany banisters I had spent 3 months sanding. He was talking about the heart pine floors I salvaged from an old mill. I crept closer, pressing my back against the siding. "Oh, I agree," a woman's voice said. Probably the realtor. "But the view, Brad. The view is the selling point. We can list this at $2.8 million for the lot alone. A developer from New York would snap this up in a week. Bulldozing is cheap." Bulldozing. They were talking about destroying my home like it was a rotting shed. "But what about the owners?" another male voice asked. "The parents. Are they on board with a quick closing?" I held my breath, waiting for Vanessa to speak up. Waiting for my daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike on this very driveway, to say no. My parents love this house. Instead, I heard ice clinking in a glass. "Don't worry about them," Vanessa said. Her voice was smooth, detached. It sounded like she was discussing a business merger, not her parents. "Mom does whatever I tell her. She is packing right now." "And the father?" the realtor asked. Brad laughed. A cruel barking sound. "The old man." Brad sneered. "Don't worry about Eli. He is half senile anyway. We are moving them to Shady Acres Assisted Living on Monday. We told him it is a vacation resort. By the time he realizes it is a nursing home, the papers will be signed and the bulldozers will be rolling." My heart stopped. Literally skipped a beat. Senile. Nursing home. Vacation resort. I wasn't senile. I was 71, but I still did the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen every Sunday. I still consulted for the city on zoning disputes. But they were painting me as incompetent to steal my life. I wanted to burst through that door. I wanted to grab Brad by his designer collar and throw him off my porch. I wanted to scream at Vanessa, but I stopped myself. Beatrice. If they were downstairs drinking champagne, Beatrice was upstairs. Vanessa said she was packing. I moved away from the window. I circled around to the side door, the laundry room entrance that I knew squeaked if you didn't lift the handle just right. I lifted it perfectly. I slipped inside. The house smelled of expensive perfume, the kind Vanessa wore. It masked the smell of Beatrice's baking. It smelled like an invasion. I walked softly up the back stairs. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. The hallway was empty. The door to our master bedroom was ajar. I pushed it open. The sight that met my eyes broke my heart more than any bulldozer ever could. Beatrice was sitting on the edge of the bed. Our bed. The quilt she had stitched by hand was stripped off, wadded up in the corner. She was crying. Not loud sobbing, but that silent shaking weeping of a woman who has given up hope. All around her were black plastic garbage bags. She wasn't packing suitcases. She was packing trash bags. She was folding her clothes, her church dresses, her cardigans, and shoving them into the black plastic. "Beatrice," I whispered. She jumped, dropping a framed photo of us from our wedding day. The glass cracked. "Eli," she gasped. Her eyes were red and swollen. "You are back. You are back early." I rushed over to her. I knelt down and took her hands. They were trembling like leaves in a storm. "Honey, what is going on?" I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Why are you packing? Why are there trash bags?" She looked at me with terror in her eyes. Not terror of me, but terror for me. "Vanessa said we have to go," she sobbed. "She came this morning, Eli. She brought Brad and those people. She said the law has changed. She said because of your episode last year, the state is taking the house. My episode. I had a transient ischemic attack, a mini stroke 6 months ago. I was in the hospital for 2 days. I recovered fully. My doctor gave me a clean bill of health." "She lied to you, Beatrice," I said, gripping her hands tighter. "The state isn't taking anything." Beatrice shook her head, tears flying. "No, Eli. She showed me the papers. She has the authority. She said if we don't leave by tonight, the police will come. She said they will put you in the state ward, the bad one downtown. She said she found us a nice apartment, but we have to sell the house to pay for it." She pointed to the trash bags. "She said we can't take the furniture, Eli. She said it is too old. She said just take the clothes." I looked at the trash bags. I looked at the cracked photo on the floor. They weren't just stealing the house. They were stripping us of our dignity. They were making my wife, my queen, feel like a squatter in her own home. I stood up. My knees popped, but I didn't feel it. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling over me. "Leave the bags, Beatrice," I said. "What?" she whispered. "But we have to go." Brad said. "I don't give a damn what Brad said," I growled. I walked over to the closet. I pulled out my old leather briefcase, the one I used when I was a working architect, the one that held my blueprints and my contracts. I opened it. I checked the contents, my passport, my deed, and a small black notebook where I kept the numbers of people you don't mess with. I snapped the briefcase shut. "Eli, where are you going?" Beatrice cried, reaching for me. "Don't go down there. Brad is drinking. He gets mean when he drinks." I turned to her. I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "I built this house, Beatrice," I said softly. "I drove every nail. I laid every brick, and nobody, not Brad, not Vanessa, not the devil himself, is going to put you out on the street while I am still breathing." I heard a burst of laughter from downstairs. A champagne cork popped. "They are celebrating," I said, looking toward the door. "They are drinking a toast to our demise." I picked up the briefcase. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. "Stay here, Beatrice." "Lock the door." "Eli, please." I walked out of the bedroom. I walked to the top of the stairs. I looked down into the great room, the room with the 20-foot ceilings I designed to catch the morning light. Vanessa was standing there holding a crystal flute. Brad was leaning back on my leather recliner, his feet up on the coffee table. The two realtors were shaking hands. "So it is a deal," the realtor said. "We will list it tomorrow. Quick sale cash buyers only." Brad raised his glass. To the sale, he grinned. And to the Porsche. I took the first step down. My boot hit the wood. Hard. Thud. The sound echoed through the cavernous room. Brad froze. Vanessa looked up. The smile dropped from her face like a mask falling off. She looked at me standing at the top of the stairs. I wasn't the frail old man she described. I was 6'2". I was broad-shouldered, and I was looking at her with the eyes of a stranger. "Dad," she stammered, lowering the glass. You are home." "Get your feet off my table, Brad," I said. My voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. Brad blinked. He took his feet down slowly. He looked at Vanessa, then back at me. He tried to summon his arrogance, but it wavered. "Hey, Eli," he said, forcing a smile. We were just discussing some financial planning for you and Beatrice." I walked down the rest of the stairs. Step by step, I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of them. I looked at the realtors. "Get out," I said. "Excuse me?" the male realtor asked, adjusting his tie. I pointed to the door. "This is private property. Get out, now, or I call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing." Vanessa stepped forward. Her shock was replaced by annoyance. She put her hand on her hip the way she did when she was a teenager, defying me. "Dad, stop it," she snapped. "You are embarrassing us. These are professionals. We are doing this for you." "For me?" I asked, looking at her. "Selling my house is for me. Making your mother cry into a trash bag is for me." "It is necessary," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "You had a stroke, Dad. You can't handle this place. The maintenance, the taxes. It is too much. I am taking over. I have the power of attorney." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a folded document. She waved it in my face like a flag of surrender. "I have the power, Dad." She set her eyes cold and hard. I signed the listing agreement. "It is done." I looked at the paper. I looked at Brad, who was smirking now, sensing the tide turning back in their favor. "Don't fight it, old man," Brad said, taking a sip of his champagne. "We are doing you a favor. Just go back upstairs and help Beatrice pack. The movers come at 6. I looked at the champagne flute in his hand. My crystal, my wine, my house. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who just set the timer on the charges. "You think that paper makes you the king?" I asked Vanessa. "It makes me the decision maker," she said smugly. I looked at the realtors who were watching this family drama with wide eyes. "You might want to stay," I said to them. "You are about to see a very interesting legal precedent." I walked over to the landline phone on the kitchen counter. I picked up the receiver. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Who are you calling?" Vanessa demanded. "The police." "Go ahead. They will just tell you to listen to your legal guardian." I didn't answer her. I waited for the line to connect. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Thaddeus," I said. "It is Eli." Eli Thaddeus Moore answered. "My oldest friend, the retired federal judge, the man who knew more about property law than anyone in the state of Georgia. How was the fishing?" "The fishing was cut short," I said, staring directly at Brad. "I have a pest infestation at the house, Thaddeus. Big rats. They are trying to chew through the foundation." I heard Thaddeus shift in his chair on the other end of the line. His voice sharpened. "Is it Vanessa?" "It is," I said. "She is waiving the power of attorney. She has realtors here. Beatrice is in tears." "I see," Thaddeus said. "And she forgot about the trust, didn't she?" "She forgot about everything, Thaddeus," I said. "She thinks she owns the place." I could hear the smile in Thaddeus's voice. "Do you want me to bring the pesticide?" "Bring the heavy stuff," I said. "And Thaddeus, bring the original deed, the one from 1985. "Consider it done," Thaddeus said. "Give me 20 minutes. And Eli, don't sign anything." I hung up the phone. I turned back to the room. Vanessa was glaring at me. "Who was that?" she demanded. "Just a friend," I said calmly. I walked over to my recliner, the one Brad had just vacated. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I looked at the stunned group of vultures. You have 20 minutes, I said. Drink your champagne. Enjoy the view. Because when my friend gets here, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, you are going to need a lot more than a piece of paper to save you. Brad laughed nervously. He is bluffing, Ness. He is just a crazy old man. I closed my eyes and leaned back. We will see, Brad, I said. We will see. Upstairs, I heard Beatrice drop a shoe. Downstairs, the clock on the mantel ticked. Tick-tock. The war for the lake house had just begun, and they had no idea they were standing on a minefield. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a judge's gavel counting down the seconds of my life. I stood in the center of the great room, the room where I had held Vanessa as a baby and danced with Beatrice on our 25th anniversary. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was the defendant in a trial I didn't know was happening. The two realtors from Elite Lakefront Realty looked uncomfortable. They shifted their weight from one foot to the other, clutching their leather portfolios like shields. They were accustomed to quick sales and eager sellers, not angry old men with calloused hands and a fire in their eyes. I looked at the male realtor, a man with teeth so white they looked fake, and a suit that cost more than my truck. I believe I asked you to leave, I said, my voice steady and low. He looked at Vanessa, then back at me. Mr. King, we were under the impression that this property was ready for immediate listing. Your daughter indicated. My daughter does not own this house, I interrupted, taking a step toward him. I own this house. My name is on the deed. My sweat is in the mortar. And right now you are trespassing on private land. I pointed a finger at the front door, the heavy oak door I had carved myself. Walk out that door right now and take your magnetic signs with you. If I see your car on my driveway in 5 minutes, I am calling the sheriff to report an intrusion. The female realtor grabbed her purse. Come on, Jerry, she whispered. Let's go. We can reschedule. This is a domestic dispute. They turned to leave their heels clicking rapidly on the heart pine floors. Stay right where you are, Vanessa barked. Her voice was sharp, commanding. It was the voice she used on her subordinates at the firm, not the voice a daughter uses with her father. She stepped between me and the realtors. She held up a hand to stop them, then turned her cold gaze on me. They are not going anywhere, Dad, she said, and neither are you. At least not until you sign the disclosure forms. I looked at her. I looked at the face that used to look up at me with adoration when I fixed her bicycle. Now that face was hard. Her makeup was flawless, covering any trace of humanity. She looked like a stranger wearing my daughter's skin. I am not signing anything, Vanessa, I said. I am sending these vultures away, and then you and your husband are going to leave. You are going to leave before I forget that I love you. Vanessa laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You really don't get it, do you, Dad? You think you are still in charge. You think because you built this place, you rule it. But the world doesn't work on sentimentality anymore. It works on law. She walked over to the kitchen island where her designer handbag sat. It was a Birkin bag Beatrice told me once it cost $10,000, enough to feed a family for a year. Vanessa reached inside and pulled out a thick document stapled at the top. She slapped it onto the granite countertop. Read it, she said. I looked at the paper. I didn't need to read it. I recognized the letterhead. I recognized the date. 6 months ago. It was the durable power of attorney. I felt a pang of regret so sharp it almost brought me to my knees. I remembered that day. I had just come home from the hospital after the TIA, the mini stroke. I was scared. For the first time in my life, I felt mortal. My hand was shaking. My speech was a little slurred. Vanessa had been there. She had brought me soup. She had fluffed my pillows. She had held my hand and told me not to worry about the bills, about the taxes, about the complex management of the estate. Just sign this, Dad, she had said, her voice sweet as honey. It just lets me help you pay the bills if you get sick again. It is just a safety net. I trusted her. I trusted my blood. So I signed. Now that safety net was being used as a noose. I walked over and looked at the document. My signature was there, scrawled and shaky from the stroke. This was for emergencies, Vanessa, I said, looking up at her. This was in case I was in a coma. In case I couldn't speak. You had a stroke, Dad. Vanessa said, her voice assuming a mockingly sympathetic tone. It affected your brain. You are confused. You forget things. Last month you forgot to pay the landscaper. I fired the landscaper, I snapped, because he was charging us double. That is not dementia, Vanessa, that is fiscal responsibility. Something you wouldn't understand. It doesn't matter. she said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. This document says that if I determine you are incapacitated, I assume full control of your assets. I make the medical decisions. I make the financial decisions. She looked at the realtors. And as his legal guardian, I have decided that this house is too much for him. It is a danger. The stairs, the isolation. It is irresponsible to let him stay here. Brad chimed in from the sofa. He was eating a piece of expensive brie cheese, wiping his mouth with a napkin. We are doing this for you, Eli, he said, his mouth full. We found a great spot for you guys. Shady Acres. It is top tier. They have bingo nights. They have a van that takes you to the mall on Tuesdays. You will love it. I looked at Brad. This man who had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. Shady Acres, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. That is a warehouse for the dying Brad. I visited my friend Joe there. It smells like urine and bleach. You want to put me in a kennel. It is an assisted living facility, Vanessa corrected. And it is expensive. That is why we have to sell the house. To pay for your care. Care, I repeated. You call this care? Making your mother cry upstairs. Packing her life into trash bags. I slammed my hand onto the counter, making the realtors jump. This isn't about care, Vanessa. This is about debt. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I know about the credit cards, I said. I know about the second mortgage on your condo. I know Brad leased that Porsche even though he hasn't hit his sales quota in 6 months. You are drowning, Vanessa. You are living a champagne life on a beer budget, and you want to liquidate my life to pay for your mistakes. Brad stood up. His face turned red. Watch your mouth, old man, he warned. You don't know anything about business. This is asset management. This house is a wasting asset. We are unlocking the equity. Unlocking the equity, I shouted. This is my home. This is where your mother wants to die. You are stealing it. Vanessa stepped closer. She looked me right in the eye. It is already done, Dad. I signed the listing agreement this morning. I accepted the offer from Mr. Sterling, the developer from New York. He wired the deposit an hour ago. The deposit. The money. That was why they were celebrating. They had already touched the cash. You accepted an offer, I asked quietly, without talking to me, without asking Beatrice. You are incapacitated, Vanessa said coldly. You don't get a vote. I grabbed the power of attorney document. I wanted to rip it in half. I wanted to tear it into confetti and throw it in her face. But Vanessa was faster. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Don't do it, she hissed. It is a legal document filed with the county clerk. Tearing it up changes nothing. The police will be here in an hour to escort you off the property. The police, I asked, stunned. You called the police on your own father. I called for a welfare check, she said, smoothing her dress. I told them my father is suffering from dementia and is becoming aggressive. I told them I need assistance moving him to a safe facility. I looked at her and I saw the truth. There was no daughter left in there. The little girl who used to sit on my lap while I drew blueprints was gone, consumed by greed, consumed by the need to keep up appearances. She was willing to humiliate me, to declare me insane, to have me dragged out of my own home in handcuffs just to get her hands on the $3 million this land was worth. Brad laughed from the living room. Face it, Eli, he said. The game is over. You had a good run, but it is time to pasture. Don't make a scene. Just go get Beatrice and get in the truck. I pulled my hand away from Vanessa. I smoothed my jacket. I looked at the realtors who were watching this tragedy unfold with a mix of horror and fascination. You should leave, I told them softly. I won't tell you again. The realtors didn't wait for Vanessa's permission this time. They hurried out the front door, sensing that the air in the room was about to explode. I turned back to my daughter. You think this piece of paper makes you powerful? I asked, pointing at the document. It gives me the authority, she said, lifting her chin. Authority is borrowed, Vanessa, I said. Power is earned. You think you have won because you know the law, but you forgot who taught you how to read. I walked toward the stairs to get my wife. I stopped at the bottom step and looked back at them. You have 1 hour, I said. 1 hour before the sheriff gets here. Enjoy your victory lap. Drink your champagne. Touch the furniture you think you are selling. Because once I walk out that door, Vanessa, I am not your father anymore. I am your adversary. And I have never lost a war on my own territory. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Save the dramatic speeches for the nursing home, Dad," she said, turning her back on me to pour another drink. I walked up the stairs. Every step felt heavy. My heart was breaking, but my mind was sharpening. They wanted a senile old man. They wanted a victim. They were about to find out that the architect hadn't lost his touch. I reached the bedroom door. Beatrice was waiting, sitting on a trash bag, clutching her Bible. "Did you fix it, Eli?" she asked hopefully. "Not yet." "Beatrice," I said, helping her stand up. "Then we have to go," she whispered. "Yes," I said, looking around the room we built together. "We have to go. But we are coming back, Beatrice. And when we do, we are going to burn their world to the ground." I picked up the bags. I didn't look back. I led my wife out of our home, past the daughter who had betrayed us, and out into the cold October air. But as I walked past Brad, he smirked at me. "Don't forget your pills, Pops," he sneered. I stopped. I looked at him. "I don't need pills, Brad," I said. "I just need a good lawyer. And I have the best one in the state on speed dial." I walked out to the truck. I helped Beatrice inside. I started the engine. As we drove down the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Vanessa standing in the window watching us leave. She looked like a queen surveying her new kingdom. "Enjoy the castle, Vanessa," I thought, "because I am about to pull the foundation out from under you." The blue lights of the sheriff cruiser reflected off the front windows of the house I built with my own hands. It was a rhythmic strobe light of shame pulsing against the white siding. I stood on the porch, my hands still gripping the doorknob, while my son-in-law Brad stood behind the screen door holding his phone like a weapon. He had actually done it. He had dialed 911. He had reported me the owner of this estate as a trespasser and a threat. I watched the deputy step out of the car. It was Deputy Miller. I knew him. I had helped his father design a barn 10 years ago. He was a good kid, young and respectful, but tonight he walked up my driveway with his hand resting cautiously on his holster. He looked uncomfortable. He looked like a man who had been called to arrest his own grandfather, Mr. King. Deputy Miller said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "We got a call about a disturbance. Brad here says you are refusing to leave the premises and that you made threats." I looked at the boy. I looked at the badge on his chest. "I live here, son," I said, my voice calm but tight. "This is my house. These people inside are the ones causing the disturbance. They are throwing my wife out on the street." The screen door creaked open. Vanessa stepped out. She didn't look like a grieving daughter anymore. She looked like a lawyer closing a hostile takeover. She held the clipboard with the durable power of attorney document clipped to the front. She walked right past me, ignoring my presence, and handed the clipboard to the deputy. "Officer," she said, her voice smooth and professional, "my father is suffering from advanced dementia. He had a severe TIA 6 months ago. As you can see right here, I am his legal guardian. I have full power of attorney over his assets and his living arrangements." Miller took the clipboard. He clicked on his flashlight even though it was still afternoon. The dark clouds of an approaching storm made the air dim. He read the document. He flipped to the second page. He checked the seal of the county clerk. I watched his face. I saw the moment the law overtook his heart. He frowned. He looked up at me, then back at the paper. "Mr. King," he said softly, "is this your signature?" I looked at the scrawl on the bottom line, the signature I had given her in a moment of weakness and trust. "It is," I said. "But that was for emergencies. I am not incapacitated, Miller. You know me. I am talking to you right now. I am lucid." "That is part of the condition," Vanessa interrupted. She stepped closer to the deputy, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "He has moments of clarity, officer, but then he snaps. He becomes violent. He just threatened to throw my husband through a window. We have arranged for him and my mother to stay at a specialized facility. We are just trying to get them there safely." Brad stepped out behind her, playing the part of the concerned victim perfectly. He raised a fist at me. "Officer Brad lied. I am worried about Beatrice. She is in there crying. He is scaring her." I felt the blood boil in my veins. I took a step toward Brad. "You liar," I growled. "You represent everything that is wrong with this world." "Sir." "Back up," Deputy Miller said, raising his hand. His tone had changed. It was authoritative now. I stopped. I realized what was happening. Every move I made to defend myself just confirmed their lie. If I yelled, I was aggressive. If I fought, I was violent. If I refused to leave, I was non-compliant. They had painted me into a corner using my own anger as the paint. Miller looked at me with pity in his eyes. Mr. King, the paperwork is in order. Legally, Mrs. Miller here has the authority to decide who resides on this property. If she asks you to leave, you have to leave. Otherwise, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Otherwise, he would have to arrest me. He would have to put handcuffs on a 71-year-old architect in front of his neighbors. I looked at the house. I looked at the second-floor window where Beatrice was watching. I couldn't let her see that. I couldn't let her see her husband dragged away like a criminal. Fine, I said. I spat the word out like a curse. Fine. I turned to Vanessa. We need time, I said. We need to pack. We have 40 years of life in this house, Vanessa. You can't just expect us to leave in 10 minutes. Vanessa checked her diamond-encrusted watch. You have 1 hour, she said. The movers are coming at 6 to stage the furniture for the open house. I want you gone before they get here. I don't want you confusing the workers. 1 hour, I repeated. To pack 40 years into a truck. Take what you need for the week, she said dismissively. I have already rented an apartment for you. It is in East Point. It is a studio, small but cozy, easy to clean. You won't have to worry about stairs. East Point. That was 50 miles away, in a neighborhood known for industrial warehouses and crime. She wasn't just moving us, she was exiling us. She was putting us in a storage unit to rot. I walked past her. I bumped her shoulder. It was petty, but it was the only physical rebellion I could afford. She stumbled slightly and glared at me, but said nothing. I went inside. The house felt different now. It didn't feel like mine. It felt like a corpse that was being picked clean by vultures. Beatrice was waiting in the hallway. She had heard everything. She had wiped her tears, but her eyes were hollow. She held 2 large suitcases. We have to go, don't we, Eli? She whispered. Yes, Bea, I said, taking the heavy bags from her hands. We have to go. She looked around the great room. She looked at the fireplace where we hung stockings every Christmas. She looked at the kitchen where she taught Vanessa to bake cookies. How could she? Eli, she asked, her voice trembling, how could she do this? We gave her everything. We paid for her college. We paid for her wedding. We loved her. Greed is a powerful drug, Beatrice, I said, guiding her toward the door. It rewrites your memory. It turns love into leverage. We walked out to the porch. Brad was sitting on the railing smoking a cigarette. He didn't even have the decency to stand up as my wife walked past him. Don't worry, Bea, he called out, smoke curling from his mouth. The apartment has cable. You can watch your soaps. I stopped. I dropped the suitcases. I turned to look at him. Brad flinched. He dropped his cigarette. One day, Brad, I said, my voice low and dangerous. One day you will reach for your wallet and it will be empty. You will reach for your wife and she will be gone. And you will remember this moment. You will remember the smoke in your face and the arrogance in your heart. And you will realize that this was the moment you signed your own death warrant. Brad laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Whatever, old man. Just get off my property. His property. I picked up the bags. I walked Beatrice down the steps. The deputy watched us go, his hand resting on his belt, his face a mask of regret. He knew it was wrong, but he was a slave to the paper just like the rest of them. We reached my truck, my old Ford F-150. It was rusted, it was dented, but it was mine. Nobody had a lien on it. Nobody had a power of attorney over it. I opened the passenger door. Beatrice climbed in. She looked small in the big seat. She looked like a refugee fleeing a war zone. I threw the suitcases into the bed of the truck. They landed with a heavy thud next to the cooler full of trout I had caught that morning, fish that were meant for a celebration dinner. Now they would rot just like my relationship with my daughter. I walked around to the driver's side. Vanessa had come down the steps. She was standing in the driveway watching us load up. She wanted to make sure we actually left. She wanted to see the taillights. She looked impatient. She was typing on her phone, probably texting the developer that the property was vacated. I stopped. I put my hand on the door handle of my truck. I looked at her. She looked up. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. Or maybe it was just the reflection of the sun setting behind me. Vanessa, I said. She sighed, dropping her phone to her side. What now, Dad? Do you need directions to the apartment? I texted them to Mom. I shook my head. I don't need directions, I said. I know exactly where I'm going. I looked at the house, the magnificent structure of glass and wood that rose behind her. I remember when you were 5, I said. You drew a picture of this house, with crayons. You put a big yellow sun over it. You wrote, "My happy place." Vanessa shifted her weight. That was a long time ago, Dad. Things change. Markets change. People change, I corrected. I looked her dead in the eye. You think you won today, Vanessa? You think you secured the bag? You think $3 million is a lot of money? It is a lot of money, she snapped. It is generational wealth. No, I said softly. This house was generational wealth. The memories were wealth. The family was wealth. I opened the truck door. You just traded a diamond for a handful of glass, Vanessa. She rolled her eyes. Spare me the sermon, Dad. Drive safe. I climbed into the cab. I started the engine. The old V8 roared to life, drowning out the sound of the wind in the trees. I rolled down the window one last time. Vanessa, I shouted over the engine. She looked at me annoyed. You sold your soul today, I said. She smiled, a cold, sharp smile that showed all of her teeth. No, Dad, she shouted back. I sold a $3 million house, and I kept the commission. She turned around and walked back up the stairs. She walked back into my home and slammed the heavy oak door shut. I put the truck in gear. My hand was shaking on the shifter. Not from age, from rage. Beatrice reached over and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was warm. Where are we going, Eli? She whispered. We can't go to East Point. I won't go there. I looked at her. We aren't going to East Point, Bay, I said. I pulled the truck out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. I looked at the road ahead. We are going to the Motel 6 off the highway, I said. And then I asked. Then I am going to make a phone call. Who are you calling? She asked. I am calling the wrecking crew, I said. I turned onto the main road. The sun was gone now, the sky was dark, but in my mind the blueprints were already being drawn. Vanessa thought she had evicted me. She thought she had closed the door. She didn't know that I still had the master key. And I wasn't going to use it to open the door. I was going to use it to lock them in. I drove into the night, leaving the lake behind. The water was calm, but a storm was coming, and its name was Elijah King. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner, the kind of cheap industrial scent that tries to cover up 1,000 bad decisions. We were at the Motel 6 off Interstate 85, about 10 miles from the lake, but it felt like we were on a different planet. The neon sign outside flickered with a rhythmic buzzing sound, casting a sickly pink light through the thin curtains. I sat in a plastic chair by the door watching my wife. Beatrice was sitting on the edge of the mattress, still wearing her church coat because she refused to touch the bedspread. She was staring at the wall at a water stain that looked like a map of a country that didn't exist. She hadn't said a word since we left the driveway. She just held her purse in her lap, clutching it like it was the last anchor keeping her from drifting away into the dark. This was the woman who had marched with me in Selma. This was the woman who had raised a child while working double shifts at the library so I could finish my architecture degree. She was a queen. And now, because of the greed of our own flesh and blood, she was sitting in a roadside motel room listening to the sound of 18-wheelers roaring down the highway. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into dust. But underneath the dust, there was something harder, something made of steel and concrete. I stood up. I walked over to the mini-fridge and took out a bottle of water. I opened it and handed it to her. Drink something, B, I said softly. She took the bottle but didn't drink. She looked up at me with eyes that were red and raw. Is this it, Eli? She whispered. Is this how it ends? We work for 50 years, we build a life, and we end up here. Watching cops on a bolted-down TV while our daughter throws our furniture into a dumpster. No, I said. My voice was rough. This is not the end, Beatrice. This is the intermission. This is the part of the movie where the bad guys think they have won because the hero is down on one knee. But we are old Eli, she said, tears spilling over again. Vanessa has the lawyers. She has the paper. You heard the deputy. The law is on her side. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain an inch. I looked out at the parking lot where my rusted truck sat under a street lamp. The law is a tricky thing, B, I said. It is like a building. If you look at it from the front, it looks solid, indestructible. But if you look at the blueprints, if you know where the load-bearing walls are, you realize that the whole thing is just stress and tension. And if you pull the right brick, the whole thing comes down. I let the curtain fall back. I need to make a call. I stepped outside into the humid Georgia night. I dialed Thaddeus. He picked up on the first ring. "I am 5 minutes away," Eli Thaddeus said. "I tracked your phone. I saw you head toward the interstate, room 112 right." "You are a scary man, Thaddeus," I said. "I am a federal judge, Eli," he replied. "Privacy is a concept I abandoned in the 80s. Put the kettle on if they have one. I am bringing the files." 10 minutes later, a black Lincoln Town car pulled into the lot. It looked out of place among the beat-up sedans and work trucks. Thaddeus Moore stepped out. He was 70 years old, but he moved with the grace of a man who played tennis 3 times a week. He was wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit and a fedora. In his hand, he carried a thick leather portfolio that looked older than Vanessa. He walked up to me and didn't offer a handshake. He pulled me into a hug, a strong, brotherly embrace that smelled of expensive tobacco and old books. "I am sorry, Eli," he said. "I am so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said, pulling back. "Be dangerous." He nodded and followed me into the room. When Beatrice saw him, she tried to stand up to smooth her coat to be the hostess she had always been. "Thaddeus," she said, her voice trembling, "look at us. We are in a mess." Thaddeus took her hands and kissed them gently. "Beatrice, you could be sitting in a cardboard box and you would still be the most elegant woman in Georgia. Sit down, rest. Eli and I have work to do." He pulled the rickety table from the corner to the center of the room. He sat down and placed the leather portfolio on the surface. He opened it. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, blueprints, and legal documents dating back decades. He also pulled out a crisp photocopy of the document Vanessa had waved in my face. The durable power of attorney. "I got a copy from the county clerk's digital archive on my way over," Thaddeus said, adjusting his reading glasses. I wanted to see exactly what we were dealing with. He tapped the paper with a gold pen. "It is a standard form, Eli, but it is aggressive. It grants her immediate authority upon the determination of incapacity. And the definition of incapacity here is broad. It says if 2 physicians or 1 physician and a psychologist certify that you are unable to manage your affairs, she takes control. But I am not incapacitated." I slammed my hand on the table. "I do the Sunday crossword in pen, Thaddeus." "I know that," Thaddeus said calmly. "And you know that. But she is building a narrative. The TIA you had 6 months ago gives her a foothold. She will find a doctor. There are plenty of doctors in Atlanta who will sign anything for $500. If she gets that certification, fighting this in probate court could take 2 years. 2 years, I whispered. By then, the house will be gone. Sterling, the developer, wants to bulldoze it next week." "Exactly," Thaddeus said. "If we fight her on the power of attorney, we are fighting on her turf. We are fighting a defensive war. She has the momentum. She has the possession of the property, and possession is 9/10 of the law." He closed the power of attorney file and pushed it aside like it was a plate of cold food. "So we don't fight her on her turf," Thaddeus said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We fight her on ours." He reached into the portfolio and pulled out a document that was much older. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed at the edges. The typewriter ink was faded but legible. "Do you remember 1985, Eli?" Thaddeus asked. I nodded. That was the year I bought the land. It was just a forest back then, just trees and a view of the lake. "You came to my office," Thaddeus continued. "You said you wanted to protect this land for your family. You said you wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to you, the land would be safe. I remember I said, 'We set up the King Family Land Trust.'" Thaddeus nodded. "A land trust. It is a beautiful instrument, Eli. It separates the legal ownership from the beneficial interest. The trust owns the land. You and Beatrice are the beneficiaries. And you, Eli, you are the trustee. But Vanessa's paper says she takes over as trustee if I am incompetent," I pointed out. Thaddeus held up a finger. "That is true for standard trusts. But you were paranoid in 1985, Eli. Do you remember why?" I thought for a moment. The memories came flooding back. "My brother," I said. "My brother had just lost his farm because his son gambled the deed away. I was terrified that someone would trick me out of my property." Thaddeus nodded. "So we added a clause, a poison pill. Something that would lock the asset down so tight that even a nuclear bomb couldn't move it without the specific handwritten consent of the original grantor. He flipped the document to the last page. He pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Clause 12, Thaddeus said. The gatekeeper clause. I leaned in, squinting in the dim light of the motel room. I read the words I had dictated nearly 40 years ago. Notwithstanding any other provision herein or any subsequent delegation of authority, including power of attorney, the specific allocation of access rights and easements appurtenant to the primary residence shall remain under the sole revocable authority of Elijah King. Any transfer of the primary parcel without the simultaneous and explicit transfer of the access easement by the grantor renders said easement null and void. I read it twice. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning started to clear in my mind like fog lifting off the lake. Translate it for me, Thaddeus, I whispered, my heart starting to beat faster. In plain English. Thaddeus took off his glasses and leaned back in the plastic chair. It means this, Eli. The house sits on Parcel A, but the driveway, the 2-mile-long winding road that connects the house to the public highway, sits on Parcel B. I remembered. I had split the land to lower the property taxes back in the 90s. Exactly, Thaddeus said. Vanessa is selling the house. Parcel A. Her power of attorney allows her to sell the structure, but she forgot about the road. She forgot about Parcel B. He tapped the clause again. This clause says that the right to use that road is not automatic. It does not transfer with the house unless you, Elijah King, personally sign a specific easement grant. Not your agent. Not your guardian. You. I looked at Thaddeus. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. So if she sells the house, I said, she sells a house that nobody can get to Thaddeus finished. She sells an island in a sea of your land. Without your signature on the easement, that driveway becomes private property. Your private property. I looked at Beatrice. She was listening now, her head tilted to the side. So we can stop them? Beatrice asked. Thaddeus shook his head. No, B. We don't stop them. We let them sell it. We let them take the money from the developer. We let them spend it. Why, I asked. Because if we stop them now, they just try again later. Thaddeus said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. But if we let them sell a landlocked house without disclosing the easement issue, they are committing fraud. Real estate fraud. Wire fraud. He looked at me. Sterling, the developer. He is a shark, right? He is, I said. He destroys neighborhoods for a living. Imagine how a shark reacts when he buys a $3 million steak and finds out he can't swallow it, Thaddeus said. He will sue them, I said. He won't just sue them, Thaddeus said. He will destroy them. He will demand his money back. And if they have already spent it, they go to jail, I finished. Thaddeus closed the folder. You are the gatekeeper, Eli. You control the road, and right now you are going to close the gate. I sat back in the chair. The smell of stale cigarettes didn't bother me anymore. The flickering neon light looked like fireworks. I looked at my hands. The hands that built the house. The hands that Vanessa thought were too old to hold on to power. She thought she held the keys to the kingdom, I said quietly. I looked at Thaddeus, and for the first time in 12 hours, a smile touched my lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized the sheep left the gate open. She has the keys, I said, but I own the ground she is standing on. Thaddeus pulled a flask from his pocket. He poured a small amount into the motel water glass. To clause 12, he said, raising the glass. I took the glass. To the gatekeeper, I said. I drank the whiskey. It burned going down. A good burn. A cleansing burn. I looked at Beatrice. Pack your bag. Bay, I said, standing up. Where are we going? She asked, confused. We are staying here tonight, I said. But tomorrow we are going hunting. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark highway. Vanessa wanted a war. She wanted to play big business. She wanted to be a tycoon. Well, I thought. Lesson number 1 of business, Vanessa. Always check the fine print. Especially when the architect is your father. They say that a criminal always returns to the scene of the crime, but in this case, the criminals never left. They moved in. They unpacked their bags and they put their feet up on the coffee table of a life they did not build. I sat in the cab of my Ford F-150 parked on a service road 300 yards up the ridge overlooking my property. It was a spot I had cleared 20 years ago to watch the eagles nest in the tall pines. Now I was the one perched in the dark watching the scavengers pick at the bones of my legacy. It was Friday night, 3 days since Vanessa had evicted us. 3 days since I had moved my wife into a motel room that smelled of despair. I had told Beatrice to sleep. I told her I had to go check on the truck engine, but I lied. I couldn't sleep. I needed to see them. I needed to see the enemy in their natural habitat, because if you want to catch a rat, you have to know where it eats. My house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every light in every room was blazing. It was a waste of electricity that made my architect heart ache, but it served a purpose. It let me see everything. Vanessa and Brad were not mourning the estrangement of her parents. They were throwing a party. Through the high-powered binoculars I kept for bird-watching, I saw the driveway filling up with cars. Luxury sedans. Convertibles. The kind of cars that people lease to impress people they do not like. Brad had invited his friends, the sharks from the sales floor, the women with too much filler in their lips. They were swarming into my home carrying bottles of cheap wine and laughing loud enough for the sound to carry up the ridge to where I sat in the dark. I adjusted the focus on the lenses. I saw Brad standing on the back deck. My deck. The deck where I used to sit with Beatrice and watch the sunset. He was wearing a white linen suit looking like a plantation owner from a bad movie. He was holding court surrounded by 3 men in suits. He was smoking a cigar, ashing it on the railing. I felt a spike of rage so hot it almost blinded me. That railing was hand-sanded teak. You do not ash on teak. I rolled down the window. The wind was blowing up from the lake, carrying the sound directly to me. I had designed the landscaping of the property to channel sound from the deck toward the ridge. I called it the whispering effect. It was a trick I learned from studying Greek amphitheaters. I wanted to be able to hear Beatrice call me for dinner when I was working in the woods. Now that acoustic trick was about to hand me the ammunition I needed to destroy them. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard the laughter. I heard the arrogance. Brad's voice drifted up loud and slurred by alcohol. "Yeah, it is a done deal, boys," he shouted, raising his glass. The old man finally cracked. "We are listing it for $3 million, but between you and me, we already have a cash buyer lined up. Sterling Development. We close next Friday." One of the men slapped him on the back. "That is a hell of a windfall, Brad," the man said. "What are you going to do with the commission?" "Commission?" Brad laughed. "This isn't a commission. This is an inheritance. The whole thing is ours. Vanessa got the power of attorney. We are cashing out." He took a long drag of the cigar and pointed to the empty space in the driveway. "See that spot right there," he said. "Next week there is going to be a slate gray Porsche 911 Turbo sitting there. I already put the deposit down. German engineering, baby. 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. I watched him preening like a peacock. He was spending money he didn't have on a car he didn't need sold by betraying a family he didn't respect. He was hollow, a man made of debt and bad cologne. But then the mood shifted. Vanessa walked onto the deck. She wasn't smiling. She looked frantic. She was wearing a cocktail dress, but she was gripping her phone like a lifeline. She walked up to Brad and whispered something in his ear. Brad's face changed. The smile vanished. He looked annoyed. He waved his friends away. "Give us a minute, guys," he said. "The little lady is stressing about the details." The friends laughed and went back inside, leaving Brad and Vanessa alone on the deck. I leaned forward in the truck cab. This was it. This was the moment the masks slipped. I focused the binoculars on their faces. I strained my ears against the wind. Vanessa grabbed Brad's arm. She was shaking. "Keep your voice down, Brad," she hissed, loud enough for the acoustics to carry her desperation. "You are out here buying Porsches, and I am inside trying to keep the Realtors calm. Sterling wants the inspection done by Monday." "So let him inspect it," Brad said, dismissing her concern. "The house is fine. Your dad built it like a bunker." "It is not about the house," Vanessa snapped. "It is about the timeline. We need that wire transfer by Friday, Brad. Friday at noon." Brad pulled his arm away. "I know the deadline, Vanessa. Stop riding me." "I don't think you do know," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "I saw the letter, Brad. I opened the mail you hid in the glove box." Brad froze. He looked around nervously, checking to see if his friends were watching through the sliding glass doors. Vanessa continued, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "The corporate audit is Tuesday, Brad." "Tuesday? You told me you borrowed $50,000. You lied to me." Brad looked down at his shoes. He took a nervous puff of the cigar. It got out of hand, Ness, he muttered. I was trying to cover the margin calls. The crypto market crashed. I thought I could make it back before anyone noticed. How much Vanessa demanded. How much did you take from the company accounts? Brad didn't answer. Tell me, Vanessa screamed, or I swear to God I will walk inside and tell everyone to go home. 500, Brad whispered. What? Vanessa gasped. 500,000, Brad said, his voice cracking. 500,000. I moved it from the escrow account to my personal trading fund. I lost it, Ness. It is gone. All of it. I sat in the truck and felt the blood drain from my face. $500,000. He wasn't just a bad businessman. He was a felon. He had embezzled money from his employer and lost it gambling on internet coins. That is why Vanessa asked, her voice barely a whisper. That is why you were pushing so hard to sell. That is why we had to kick my parents out today. I don't have a choice, Brad said, grabbing her shoulders. If I don't replace that money before the audit starts on Tuesday, I go to prison, Vanessa. Federal prison. This isn't a game. This house is my get-out-of-jail-free card. And what about my parents, Vanessa asked. What about my dad? We threw him out like garbage, Brad. He built this place. He is old, Brad spat out. He lived his life. Now it is his turn to save ours. Look, Ness, we sell the place for $3 million. We pay off the $500,000 I owe. We pay off your credit cards. We buy the apartment in the city, and we still have $2 million in the bank. We are set for life. Nobody has to know. Vanessa looked at him. She looked at the man she married. I watched her struggle. I saw the morality war waging behind her eyes. I waited for her to slap him. I waited for her to tell him to turn himself in. I waited for my daughter to return. But she didn't come back. She took a deep breath. She looked at the house. She looked at the guests drinking inside. And then she looked at the imaginary Porsche in the driveway. Okay, she said softly. Okay. But we have to move fast. Sterling is pushing for the inspection. We need to make sure Dad doesn't interfere. If he finds out about the audit, if he finds out we are desperate, he could block the sale. He won't find out, Brad said, regaining his confidence. He is sitting in a motel room feeling sorry for himself. He is powerless. We control the narrative. We control the asset. By next Friday, this will all be a bad memory. He kissed her on the forehead. It was the kiss of a co-conspirator, not a husband. Come on, Brad said. Let's go inside. I think I need another drink. They walked back into the house, sliding the glass door shut behind them. I lowered the binoculars. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just greed, it was survival. They were cornered rats. Brad had dug a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky, and he was using my foundation to fill it. He was willing to sacrifice my wife's happiness and my legacy to cover up his own crime. And Vanessa, my Vanessa, she knew. She knew he was a criminal, and she chose to be his accomplice. She chose the money over the father who had carried her on his shoulders. I sat there in the darkness for a long time. The music from the house thumped on a rhythmic bass line that felt like a mockery of my heartbeat. I looked at the notepad on my dashboard. I picked up a pen. 500,000. Embezzlement. Corporate audit. Tuesday. I wrote it down. This was the leverage. This was the pressure point. Thaddeus had said to let them dig their hole. Well, they hadn't just dug a hole. They had dug a bottomless pit. I started the truck. I didn't turn on the headlights. I rolled slowly down the service road, invisible in the night. They wanted to play the high-stakes game. They wanted to act like big shots. Fine. I wasn't just going to stop the sale. I was going to time it. I was going to wait until the very last second. I was going to wait until Brad thought he was safe, until he thought the check was in his hand. And then I was going to introduce him to the gatekeeper. I drove back to the motel. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. I wasn't an angry father anymore. I was an architect looking at a structurally unsound building. And I knew exactly where to place the dynamite. Brad needed $500,000 by Tuesday. He wasn't going to get a dime, but he was going to get a visit from reality. And reality, when it hits you at 70 miles an hour, hurts a lot more than a Porsche. They say the devil wears Prada, but in my experience, he wears a custom Italian suit and drives a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows that look like oil slicks. His name was Arthur Sterling, and he was the kind of man who didn't look at a forest and see nature. He looked at a forest and saw lumber yields per square foot. He was a developer from New York City, a man who had made a fortune paving over history to build luxury condos that nobody local could afford. And he was the man my daughter had chosen to execute the death sentence on my home. I sat in the motel room on Saturday morning eating a stale bagel while Thaddeus spread his files out on the bedspread. My phone rang. It wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't Brad. It was Martha Gable, my next-door neighbor. Martha was 75 years old, 5'0", and spent her days pruning her azaleas and watching the neighborhood with the vigilance of a hawk. She was my eyes on the ground. Eli, she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling with indignation. There is a man here. A big man. He is walking around your property with Vanessa. He is wearing sunglasses and he is pointing at your oak tree, the one you planted when Vanessa was born. What is he doing, Martha? I asked, gripping the phone. He is making a chopping motion with his hand, Eli. He is telling her to cut it down. He says it blocks the view of the marina. I felt a phantom pain in my chest. That white oak was 40 years old. Its roots went deep into the Georgia clay just like mine, and this stranger was sentencing it to death with a wave of his hand. I listened as Martha narrated the scene. Sterling wasn't interested in the house. He didn't step foot inside the library I had paneled with black walnut. He didn't look at the stone fireplace. To him, the structure was just an obstacle. It was debris that needed to be cleared so he could build his vision. A 20-unit luxury resort complex. Glass and steel boxes stacked on top of each other, destroying the serenity of the lake for profit. Then came the negotiation. Martha couldn't hear the numbers, but I heard them later from a source at the real estate office. Sterling stood on my deck looking out at the water. He didn't take off his sunglasses. The land is good, he told Vanessa. But the house is garbage. It is a teardown. I have to bring in a wrecking crew. That costs money. It is a solid structure, Vanessa argued, trying to sound authoritative but failing. My father was an architect. It is old, Sterling snapped. Nobody wants rustic anymore. They want modern. They want smart homes. I am offering you $2.8 million. Cash. 2.8. Brad had bragged about $3 million the night before. I knew he was doing the math in his head. 2.8 million minus the $500,000 he stole from his company, minus the mortgages, minus the credit card debt. It was still enough. It was enough to save his skin. But 2.8 is below market, Vanessa protested, weak and desperate. Take it or leave it, Sterling said, checking his gold watch. But here is the sweetener. I can close in 7 days, next Friday. Cash wire, no mortgage contingencies, no waiting for banks, 7 days. I could almost hear Brad's heart stop beating and then restart at double speed. 7 days meant the money would be there to cover his embezzlement. It meant he could pay back the company before the audit finalized. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. We will take it, Brad blurted out, stepping in front of Vanessa. We will take the 2.8, but we need a deposit. Today. A good faith deposit. Sterling smiled. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood. He knew he had them. He knew they were desperate, though he didn't know why. $100,000 wired today, Sterling said. The rest next Friday at closing. But I want the keys on Friday, and I want the house empty, no furniture, no junk. I am bringing the bulldozers in on Monday morning. Bulldozers on Monday. They shook hands. My daughter shook the hand of the man who was going to erase her childhood home from the face of the earth. I hung up the phone with Martha. I looked at Thaddeus. They did it, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They accepted the offer. 2.8 million. Closing next Friday. Thaddeus nodded slowly. 7 days, he mused. That is an accelerated timeline. Usually commercial deals take months. Why the rush? Because of the audit, I said. Brad needs to cover his theft. He needs that money like he needs oxygen. Thaddeus tapped his pen on the table. And the deposit. 100,000, I said. Wired today. Thaddeus sat up straight. This is the pivot point, Eli. That deposit is the consideration. Once that money hits their account, the contract is binding. And once they spend it, the fraud is complete. I looked out the window at the parking lot. They will spend it, I said. They can't help themselves. They are addicts, Thaddeus. Not to drugs anymore, but to the feeling of wealth. They need to feel rich to forget that they are criminals. And I was right. An hour later, my phone pinged. It was an alert from the joint bank account. I had been removed as a primary signer by Vanessa using the power of attorney, but she had forgotten to remove my email from the notification list. She was sloppy. Arrogance makes you sloppy. Wire transfer. Received $100,000. Sender Sterling Development, LLC. The money was in, and then the spending began. It was obscene. It was a masterclass in irresponsibility. Beatrice and I were sitting in a $40 a night motel room eating crackers, and our daughter was going on a spree. At 2 p.m., another alert. Transaction Lenox Square Mall, Rolex Boutique, $18,500. Brad bought the watch. He couldn't wait for the Porsche, so he bought the Rolex Daytona he had been drooling over for years. He probably put it on his wrist right there in the store, watching the second hand sweep around the dial, counting down the minutes to his salvation. He thought he was safe. He thought the deal was done. At 3:30 p.m., another alert. Transaction Hermes Atlanta, $12,000. Vanessa bought the bag, a Birkin, to replace the one she was carrying. $12,000. That was more than the down payment on the first house Beatrice and I ever bought. She bought a leather bag to carry the documents that evicted her parents. At 5:00 p.m., transaction, the Capitol Grill, $800. Dinner, steaks, fine wine. They were celebrating again. They were toasting to the $2.8 million that was coming in 6 days. They were eating the deposit. Thaddeus watched the alerts come in on my phone. He shook his head in disbelief. "They are spending the buyer's money before the closing," he said. "That is dangerous, Eli. If the deal falls through, they have to return that deposit. If they can't, that is theft by conversion. That is a felony." "I know," I said, leaning back in the plastic chair. "You should stop them," Eli, Thaddeus said, looking concerned. "You should call Vanessa, warn her, tell her about the easement. If you let them spend this money and then we drop the hammer next Friday, they go to jail, not just for the fraud, but for the theft of the deposit." I looked at Beatrice. She was sleeping on the bed, exhausted from crying. She looked frail. She looked 10 years older than she had yesterday. I looked back at Thaddeus. "Let them spend it," I said. Eli, Thaddeus warned. "This is your daughter." "No," I said, my voice hard as granite. "My daughter died the minute she put my wife in a truck and threw a trash bag at her. The woman in that mall buying handbags is a stranger. She is a predator, Thaddeus, and you don't warn a predator that the trap is set. You wait until the leg is caught. But prison, Eli, we are talking about prison time." "They made their choice," I said. "They chose the watch. They chose the bag. They chose the status over the family." I stood up and paced the small room. Brad needs that money to stay out of jail for embezzlement. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Vanessa is helping him holding the getaway bag. If I stop them now, they will just find another way to hurt us. They will sell the land to someone else. They will take out loans in my name. I turned to Thaddeus. "The only way to stop a fire, Thaddeus, is to starve it of oxygen. They need to hit the wall. They need to hit it hard. I want them to spend every dime of that 100,000. I want them to be so deep in the hole that they can't climb out." Thaddeus looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the architect who had calculated the stress load and knew exactly when the beam would snap. "All right," he said quietly. "We wait." "We wait," I repeated. I imagined Brad at the steakhouse. I imagined him laughing, checking his new Rolex, acting like the big shot he always wanted to be. He didn't know that the watch on his wrist wasn't a trophy. It was a handcuff. And Vanessa carrying her $12,000 bag. She didn't know it was filled with evidence. Mr. Sterling from New York thought he was buying a lake house. He thought he was buying a teardown. He didn't know he was buying a lawsuit. And he didn't know that the old man he ignored, the old man he wanted to bulldoze, was holding the detonator. "Let them eat steak," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them drink wine. Because next Friday, they are going to choke on it." I picked up the remote and turned on the TV. I didn't watch it. I just watched the time on the screen. 6 days left. 6 days for them to spend the money. 6 days for them to dig their own graves. And on the 7th day, I would rest. But only after I watched the walls come tumbling down. They say the wolf in sheep's clothing is dangerous, but the wolf in a white coat is lethal. Vanessa came to the motel on Monday morning driving her silver Mercedes. She didn't come with an apology. She didn't come with groceries. She came with a smile that was tight enough to snap a guitar string. She told me she wanted to take me to lunch. She said she wanted to make peace. She said she was worried about my blood pressure after the excitement of the eviction. I knew she was lying. I knew it because her eyes never met mine. She looked at my shoulder. She looked at the peeling paint on the motel door. But she never looked at her father. But I put on my coat. I told Beatrice to stay in the room and lock the door. I told her I was going to play the game. You see, if you want to catch a snake, you do not run from it. You let it coil around your arm until it thinks it has you, and then you grab it by the head. We didn't go to lunch. We drove past the diner. We drove past the barbecue joint I loved. We drove into the city to a medical building made of glass and steel in Buckhead. It wasn't a hospital. It was one of those boutique clinics where rich people go to get Botox and pretend they are going to live forever. Vanessa parked the car. "Just a quick stop, Dad," she said, her voice overly bright. "Brad has a friend who is a doctor, Dr. Thorne. He just wants to give you a quick checkup, just to make sure your TIA didn't leave any lasting damage. It is for the insurance, Dad. Just a formality." I looked at the building. I looked at her. A formality I repeated slowly, making my voice sound a little thin, a little weak, like a confused old man. "Yes, Dad," she said, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. "Just 5 minutes. Then we go get ribs. I promise." I nodded. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction of an inch. I let my hands tremble in my lap. I was an architect, but today I was an actor. "Okay, Nessie," I said, using her childhood nickname. "Okay. I am hungry, though. I forgot to eat breakfast." "You will eat soon, Dad," she said, opening her door. We walked into the lobby. It smelled of lavender and money. There were no sick people here, just people trying to look perfect. We went up to the 4th floor. The sign on the door said Integrated Wellness and Neurology, Dr. Eris Thorne. We didn't wait. We were ushered straight back. Dr. Thorne was waiting. He was young, maybe 40. He had slicked back hair, a tan that came from a bottle, and a smile that showed too many teeth. He was wearing a white coat that looked like it had been tailored in Italy. "So this is the patient," Thorne said, not looking at me but looking at Vanessa. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he is trying to impress. "This is my father, Eli King," Vanessa said. "He is the one we discussed. The memory issues. The aggression." Thorne nodded solemnly. He picked up a chart that was already filled out. He hadn't examined me yet, but the diagnosis was already written. "Hello," Elijah Thorne said, speaking loud and slow like I was deaf. "Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked around the room. I blinked. I picked at a loose thread on my trousers. I think it is 1985, I mumbled. "We just bought the land. The trees are so tall." Vanessa let out a dramatic sigh. "See," she whispered to Thorne. "He thinks he is 30 years in the past. It is getting worse, Doctor. Yesterday he didn't know who I was." Thorne made a show of writing something down. "Classic vascular dementia," he murmured. "Rapid onset. Disorientation. Confabulation. It is tragic, really." He walked over to me. He shined a light in my eyes for 2 seconds. He tapped my knee with a rubber hammer. That was the extent of his examination. "Elijah, look at me," Thorne said. "Do you know where you are?" I looked at him. I widened my eyes. "Are we at the fishing hole?" I asked. "Is the trout biting?" Thorne shook his head sadly. He turned to Vanessa. "It is clear, Mrs. Miller. He is profoundly incapacitated. He lacks the cognitive ability to make financial or medical decisions. He is a danger to himself." Vanessa nodded, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "It is so hard, Doctor. But I have to take care of him. I have to sell his house to pay for his care. But the title company, they need a certificate, a medical affidavit stating that he was incompetent when he signed the listing agreement." Thorne smiled. "I can help with that, Vanessa. Brad told me about the situation. We need to protect him." He walked over to his desk. He pulled out a document. It was on heavy bond paper. Certificate of incapacity. He signed it with a flourish. He stamped it with his medical seal. "This states that I have examined Elijah King and found him to be suffering from advanced dementia," Thorne said, handing the paper to Vanessa. "It gives you immediate activation of the power of attorney. You can sign the deed today." Vanessa took the paper. Her hands were shaking with excitement. This was it, the golden ticket. With this paper, I was legally a ghost. "Thank you, Doctor," she breathed. "You saved us." I watched the exchange. I watched the transaction. My life, my freedom being traded for a favor between friends. I sat up straight in the chair. I stopped picking at the thread. I closed my mouth. I stopped the trembling in my hands. I looked at Dr. Thorne. "Is that a Mont Blanc pen?" I asked. The room went silent. The voice that came out of my mouth wasn't the mumble of a senile old man. It was the deep, resonant baritone of Elijah King. Thorne blinked. Excuse me? The pen, I said, pointing to the instrument in his hand. It is a Mont Blanc Meisterstück. Costs about $500. Nice pen. Thorne looked confused. Yes, it is. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. You know, doctor, I said, turning back to face him. I find it interesting that you diagnosed me with vascular dementia based on a 2-minute exam. You didn't order an MRI. You didn't do a mini mental state examination. You didn't even check my blood pressure. Vanessa's eyes went wide. Dad, what are you doing? Sit down. I ignored her. I walked toward the desk. Thorne backed away slightly. I continued, my voice sharp as a scalpel. According to the Georgia Code Title 31, Chapter 32 regarding advanced directives and guardianship, a determination of incapacity requires a rigorous evaluation. It requires a review of medical history. It requires cognitive testing. I leaned on the desk looming over the doctor. And most importantly, doctor, it requires honesty. Thorne stuttered. I made a clinical judgment. Your daughter reported symptoms. My daughter is a real estate agent with a gambling debt, I said. She is not a clinician, but you are. Or at least you play one in this fancy office. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was recording. The red light was pulsing. I have a friend, Thorne. His name is Thaddeus Moore. He is a retired federal judge. We had breakfast this morning. He told me something very interesting about the Georgia Composite Medical Board. Thorne was sweating now. The tan on his forehead was glistening. What did he tell you? He told me that they take a very dim view of medical fraud, I said, especially when it involves conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen of his assets. That is a felony, Thorne. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence, and it comes with an automatic revocation of your medical license. Vanessa stepped forward, grabbing my arm. Dad, stop it. You are confused. This is the sickness talking. I spun on her. The movement was so fast, she gasped and let go. I am not sick, Vanessa, I roared. I am the sanest man in this room. I pointed a finger at Thorne. You have a choice, doctor. Right now. You can give that paper to my daughter. You can help her steal my house. And if you do, I will walk out of here and send this recording to the medical board and the district attorney. By Friday, you won't be a doctor. You will be an inmate. Thorne looked at the recording on my phone. He looked at Vanessa, who was pale as a sheet. Or I said, lowering my voice, you can tear that paper up. You can note in my file that I am fully lucid, alert, and oriented, and you can ask us to leave. Thorne didn't hesitate. He was a coward. He was a man who liked easy money, and he just realized this money was radioactive. He grabbed the paper from Vanessa's hand. Give me that, he snapped. Hey, Vanessa shouted, trying to hold on to it. That is mine. We had a deal. Brad promised you... Shut up about Brad, Thorne yelled. He ripped the certificate in half, then in quarters. He threw the pieces into the shredder behind his desk. The machine roared, eating the lie. Thorne turned to his computer. He typed furiously. Patient is alert and oriented, he said out loud as he typed. No signs of dementia. Score 30 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. Family claims of incapacity are unfounded. He hit enter. He looked at me. Mr. King, I apologize. There must have been a misunderstanding. I looked at him with disgust. There is no misunderstanding, Thorne. You are a crook. You just happen to be a crook who likes his freedom. I turned to Vanessa. She was standing there shaking with rage. Her plan had evaporated in 30 seconds. Dad, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you just did? I saved you from a kidnapping charge, Vanessa, I said. I walked to the door. I opened it and held it for her. Let's go get those ribs, Nessie, I said, my voice cold. I am starving. Vanessa didn't move. She stared at the doctor. Write another one, she demanded. I will pay you double. Get out, Thorne shouted, pointing at the door. Get out of my office. Tell Brad to lose my number. If I see either of you again, I am calling the police. Vanessa stormed out. Her heels hammered the floor like gunshots. I followed her. In the elevator, she wouldn't look at me. She stared at the numbers counting down. You think you are so smart, she whispered, venom dripping from every word. I am not smart, Vanessa, I said, watching the doors open to the lobby. I just pay attention. You stopped the certificate, she said, stepping out into the sunlight. But you didn't stop the sale. I am still the acting trustee. I can still sell the house. I just have to take the risk. You are going to sell it anyway, I asked, stopping on the sidewalk, even without the doctor's note. I have to, she said, spinning around to face me. I don't have a choice, Dad. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the panic underneath the anger. I am going to sell it, she vowed, and you can't stop me. I looked at her. I thought about the easement. I thought about the trap Thaddeus and I had set. I know, I said. I walked toward the car. I won't stop you, Vanessa. Go ahead, sell the house. She looked confused. She expected a fight. She didn't expect surrender. Really, she asked. Really, I said, opening the car door. I sat in the passenger seat. I watched her walk around the car. She looked relieved. She thought the old man had finally given up. She thought the doctor was just a minor setback. She didn't know that the doctor was just the bait. She didn't know that by forcing her to sell without the medical certificate, I had just removed her last legal defense. Now, when the lawsuit hit, she couldn't say she was acting on medical advice. She would be acting on pure, unadulterated malice. She started the car. So we are still good for the closing on Friday, she asked cautiously. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Friday is going to be a day to remember, Vanessa, I said. She smiled. She put the car in drive. She drove us toward the barbecue joint, thinking she had won the war. I touched the phone in my pocket. The recording was saved. Eat up, Vanessa, I thought. Enjoy the ribs. Because come Friday, you are going to be eating something very different. You are going to be eating crow. And it is a dish best served cold. The air in the Motel 6 room was thick with humidity and the smell of cheap coffee. It was Tuesday morning, 3 days until the closing. 3 days until my daughter Vanessa planned to sign over my life work to a man who wanted to turn it into a concrete jungle. I sat by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. Beatrice was asleep, clutching her Bible like a shield. She was exhausted. The stress was eating her alive, turning her hair gray before my eyes. Every time a car door slammed in the parking lot, she jumped, thinking it was the sheriff coming to take us away. Thaddeus sat at the wobbly table, polishing his reading glasses with a silk handkerchief. He looked calm, but I knew that look. It was the look he used to have on the bench, right before he overruled an objection and buried a defense attorney. She is desperate, Eli Thaddeus said, placing his glasses back on his nose. You stopped the doctor. That was a masterstroke. Without that medical certificate, she cannot invoke the incapacity clause of the power of attorney. So she is stuck, I asked, hope rising in my chest. Thaddeus shook his head. No, she is not stuck. She is reckless. He pulled a document from his leather portfolio. I checked the county filings this morning, Thaddeus said. Vanessa has filed an affidavit of acting trustee. What does that mean, I asked. It means she is bypassing the medical requirement, Thaddeus explained. She is using a loophole in the original trust language that allows for a successor trustee to step in if the primary trustee is unavailable or acts against the interest of the trust. She is claiming that by refusing to sell a distressed asset, you are violating your fiduciary duty. She is saying I am a bad manager, I said, my voice rising. I built the damn trust. Exactly, Thaddeus said. It is a weak legal argument. If we took it to court, we would win. But court takes months. She knows that. She is betting that she can sell the house, get the cash, and pay off Brad's debt before a judge ever sees the paperwork. She is driving a car with no brakes, hoping she can cross the finish line before she crashes. So she is going to sell it anyway, I said. She is going to try, Thaddeus said. She is relying on speed. She wants a quick close. No inspections, no questions. She just wants Sterling to wire the money on Friday. I looked out at the rain. If she sells it on Friday, Brad pays back the stolen money, and they get away with it, I said. They win. Thaddeus smiled, a cold, predatory smile. Only if the buyer remains confident, Eli. Arthur Sterling is a shark, but even sharks get scared if they smell the wrong kind of blood. What do you mean, I asked. Sterling is buying this property fast because he thinks it is clean, Thaddeus said. He thinks he is getting a steal. But what if he thought there was a problem? Not a big problem, just a nagging little doubt. A doubt that would make him pause. A doubt that would make him want to take a closer look. I looked at Thaddeus. I saw the gears turning in his legal mind. You want to spook him, I asked. I want to make him do his due diligence, Thaddeus said. I want him to send a survey crew. I want him to send engineers. Because the more people who look at that property, the more lies Vanessa has to tell to cover her tracks. He pulled a piece of plain white paper from his portfolio. He took out an old typewriter from his bag. Thaddeus didn't trust computers for sensitive work. "We are going to write a letter," he said. "An anonymous letter from a concerned neighbor." He rolled the paper into the machine. Clack, clack, clack. "Dear Mr. Sterling, welcome to the neighborhood. We hear you are planning a magnificent resort on the King property. It is a beautiful spot. However, as a neighbor who has lived here for 40 years, I feel obligated to warn you about the boundary disputes. The northern ridge has always been a point of contention. There are rumors of encroachments, old fences that don't match the deed, soil stability issues near the access road. You are a smart man, Mr. Sterling. I am sure you have done your survey work, but if I were you, I would double-check the markers before you pour any concrete. Sincerely, a friend." Thaddeus pulled the paper out. He handed it to me. "It is vague," I said, reading it. "It doesn't mention the easement. It doesn't mention the road." "That is the point," Thaddeus said. "If we tell him about the easement now, he might walk away immediately. We don't want him to walk away yet. We want him to demand answers. We want him to call Vanessa and scream. We want to force Vanessa to go on record denying any issues." Why, I asked. "Because," Thaddeus said, leaning forward, his eyes intense, "if Vanessa signs a seller's disclosure stating there are no boundary issues when she hasn't even checked, she commits perjury. She commits fraud against the buyer. We are handing her a shovel, Eli. We are letting her dig the hole deeper." I looked at the letter. It was a simple piece of paper. But it was a grenade. "Send it," I said. Thaddeus put the letter in a plain envelope. He didn't use a stamp. He called a courier service he trusted. "Get this to Sterling's office in downtown Atlanta within the hour," he ordered. Then we waited. We didn't have to wait long. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. It was Martha, the neighbor, again. "Eli," she whispered. "Something is happening. Vanessa is back at the house. She is pacing on the deck. She is screaming at someone on the phone. She looks frantic." I smiled. The grenade had landed. I could imagine the scene. Sterling sitting in his glass office holding the anonymous letter. He was a developer. The words boundary dispute and soil stability were his nightmares. They meant delays. They meant lawsuits. He would have called Vanessa immediately. He would have demanded an explanation. "Mrs. Miller," he would say, "I just got a disturbing letter. Is there a problem with the land?" And Vanessa, desperate for the money, desperate to hide Brad's embezzlement, would do the only thing she knew how to do. She would lie. "No, Mr. Sterling," she would say. "It is just a crazy neighbor. The land is perfect." Good Sterling would reply, "Then you won't mind if I send my engineering team out tomorrow morning, just to verify. I need a clean survey before I wire the millions." And Vanessa would have to agree. She couldn't say no. Saying no would look suspicious. I hung up with Martha. I looked at Thaddeus. "She is at the house," I said. "She is panicking. Sterling must have called." Thaddeus nodded. "She is cornered, Eli. She has to lie to keep the deal alive. She is going to sign a disclosure form today guaranteeing the boundaries are clear, and tomorrow Sterling sends his team." I stood up. I walked to the corner of the room where I kept my walking stick. It was a heavy piece of hickory I had carved myself. "Tomorrow," I said, "I need to go to the hardware store, Thaddeus." "What for?" he asked. "I need some paint," I said. "Bright orange survey paint. And I need a sledgehammer." Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to do some landscaping, Eli?" I looked at him. I felt the old strength returning to my arms, the strength of the man who cleared the forest to build a home. "I am going to mark my territory, Thaddeus," I said. "Sterling is sending his men to check the boundaries. Well, I am going to make sure they find exactly what they are looking for." I walked to the door. "Thaddeus," I said, looking back. "Yes, Eli. Make sure you have your camera ready tomorrow." "Why?" "Because," I said, opening the door to the rainy afternoon, "you are going to want a picture of Brad's face when he realizes that the ground he is standing on doesn't belong to him." I drove to the hardware store. I bought a can of neon orange spray paint. I bought a heavy steel stake, and I bought a no trespassing sign. I drove past the house on my way back. I saw Vanessa's car still in the driveway. The lights were on. She was probably inside printing out fake documents, trying to hold her crumbling scheme together. She thought she was the puppet master. She thought she was pulling the strings, moving her parents around like chess pieces. She didn't know that the strings were actually attached to a bomb, and she had just pulled the pin. I patted the steel stake on the seat beside me. Tomorrow, Vanessa, I thought. Tomorrow we see who really owns the land. You have the power of attorney, but I have the power of the dirt. And dirt doesn't lie. Wednesday morning broke with a heavy gray mist clinging to the surface of Lake Lanier. It was the kind of fog that muffles sound and makes the world feel small and claustrophobic. I sat in my truck parked just off the county road at the bottom of the hill. I wasn't hiding this time. I was waiting. I had a thermos of black coffee on the dashboard and a heavy steel survey stake on the passenger seat. Beside the stake lay a 4-pound sledgehammer with a hickory handle that had been smoothed by years of my own sweat. Up on the ridge, my house was under siege, but this wasn't a siege of soldiers, it was a siege of geometry. At 8 o'clock sharp, the convoy arrived. 2 black SUVs followed by a white van with the logo Sterling Development Engineering Division painted on the side. They looked like a special ops team coming to neutralize a target. Men in hard hats and neon orange safety vests spilled out of the van. They carried tripods and laser sights and GPS poles. They weren't there to admire the view or appreciate the craftsmanship of the stonework. They were there to measure, to quantify, and to verify that the product Mr. Sterling was buying was worth $2.8 million. I watched them drive up the long, winding access road. That road was my masterpiece. When I bought the land in 1985, it was inaccessible, just a wall of granite and pine trees. I had hired the bulldozers myself. I had walked every foot of that grade, designing the switchbacks so that the driveway felt like a journey through the forest before it opened up to reveal the house. It was a 2-mile ribbon of asphalt, and it was the only way in and the only way out. I waited until they were at the top. I waited until I saw the tiny figures setting up their equipment on the lawn. Then I started my truck. I didn't drive up to the house. I drove exactly 1 mile up, to the hairpin turn by the old lightning-struck oak tree. This was the spot. According to the deed in Thaddeus's briefcase, this was the invisible line. Below this curve was Parcel B, above this curve was Parcel A. I parked the truck in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. I got out. The air was cool and damp. I could hear the distant shouts of the engineers up at the house, but down here it was quiet. I took the steel stake and the sledgehammer. I walked to the center of the asphalt. I found the crack in the pavement that I used as my marker. I placed the sharp tip of the stake against the blacktop. I raised the hammer. Clang. The sound of steel on steel rang out through the woods like a bell. Clang. I drove it deeper. The asphalt cracked. The earth beneath accepted the metal. Clang. I was breathing hard. My shoulder ached. But it was a good ache. It was the feeling of building something. Or in this case, the feeling of closing something. Up at the house, the sound of the hammering must have carried. Moments later, I heard the whine of an engine. A red blur came speeding down the driveway. It was the Porsche. Or rather, the loaner Porsche the dealership had given Brad while he waited for his custom order. He slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt just inches from my truck. He jumped out. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was loose, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His eyes were wild. "What are you doing?" he screamed, running toward me. "Are you crazy? You are blocking the road." I didn't look at him. I raised the hammer again. Clang. I drove the stake down until only 6 inches of bright orange-painted steel were visible above the road surface. Brad grabbed my arm. "Stop it, old man," he yelled. "The engineers are here. Mr. Sterling's team is up there right now. If they see you vandalizing the driveway, they will call the police." I pulled my arm away. I rested the head of the hammer on the ground and leaned on the handle, looking at him. "I am not vandalizing anything, Brad," I said calmly. "I am surveying." "Surveying?" He laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "You are digging a hole in the middle of the driveway. Get your truck out of the way. The lead engineer needs to leave in 10 minutes to take samples to the lab." I shook my head. "Road is closed, Brad." "What do you mean closed?" he sputtered. "This is the driveway. It is part of the house." "Is it?" I asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a can of neon orange spray paint. I walked to the stake. I sprayed a bright line across the asphalt perpendicular to the road. "This is my line, Brad," I said. "Everything below this line belongs to me. Everything above it belongs to the trust. Brad stared at the orange line. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He thought I was having an episode. He thought the dementia lie he had told everyone was actually coming true. "Oh my God," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You have lost it. You completely lost it. Eli, listen to me. We are selling the whole thing. The trust owns the land. Vanessa has the power of attorney. She is selling everything from the mailbox to the dock." I smiled. It was the smile of a grandfather watching a toddler try to explain quantum physics. "Vanessa is selling the house, Brad," I said softly. "But she can't sell what she doesn't own." Brad waved his hand dismissively. "You are confused, Pops. Go back to the motel. Take a nap. We will handle the paperwork." Just then a golf cart came winding down the hill. It was one of the engineers, a serious-looking man with a clipboard. He stopped when he saw the blocked road. He looked at the stake. He looked at the orange paint. "Is there a problem here?" the engineer asked, looking from Brad to me. "No problem," Brad said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just my father-in-law. He is a little confused. He thinks he is fixing a pothole. We are moving him immediately." The engineer got out of the cart. He walked over to the stake. He looked at the placement. He looked at his GPS device. He frowned. "Actually," the engineer said, checking his screen, "this marker aligns perfectly with the old subdivision plat from 1985. He looked at me with new interest. "Did you place this, sir?" "I did," I said. "I am Elijah King. I was the original surveyor of this property." The engineer nodded respectfully. "You have a good eye, Mr. King. This is the exact boundary line between the two parcels." Brad laughed nervously. "Parcels? What parcels?" "It is one lot. Lot 42. The engineer shook his head. "Well, technically, sir, it is a compound lot. But since it is a single sale, it doesn't matter. The boundary is just internal." He turned to me. "Nice work on the stake, sir." "Very precise." I winked at him. "Precision matters, son. You never know when you might need to know exactly where you stand." Brad was fuming. He grabbed the engineer by the elbow. "Look, can we just finish up? We need that report by Friday. Mr. Sterling is waiting." "Of course," the engineer said. "We are almost done. The soil samples look good. The foundation is solid. Just need to map the utilities." He got back in his golf cart and drove up the hill around my truck. Brad turned on me, his face red with rage. "You are lucky he didn't care," Brad hissed. "You are playing with fire, Eli. If you mess this deal up, if you cost me this money—" "What, Brad?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "What will you do? Will you throw me out of my house? Oh, wait, you already did that." I picked up the sledgehammer. "You better get back up there, Brad. Make sure they measure everything. Make sure they get the square footage right. You wouldn't want to accidentally sell something that isn't yours." Brad stared at me. He looked at the stake. He looked at the orange line. For a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was wondering why I was so calm. He was wondering why I was painting lines in the road instead of crying in my motel room. But then the greed took over. The $2.8 million blinded him. "You are pathetic," he spat. "A senile old man painting lines on the ground. Go ahead. Paint the whole road orange for all I care. On Friday, it all belongs to Sterling anyway." He got back in his Porsche. He had to do a 3-point turn to get around my truck. He revved the engine and sped back up the hill. I stood there alone in the mist. I looked at the stake. It looked small, insignificant, just a piece of metal sticking out of the ground. But it was the linchpin. Brad thought I was senile. The engineer thought I was just being helpful. Neither of them realized that I had just physically marked the kill zone. On Friday, when Thaddeus walked into that closing room, he wouldn't just be armed with paper. He would be armed with this orange line. I took the spray paint and made the line thicker. I wanted it to be visible from space. I got back in my truck. I poured a cup of coffee from the thermos. It was hot and bitter. I watched the engineers finish their work. I watched them pack up their vans. I watched them drive down the road, crossing my orange line without even slowing down. They were measuring the soil. They were measuring the water table. But they forgot to measure the legal rights. They forgot to check who owned the asphalt they were driving on. I watched them go. "Report looks good, boys," I whispered to the windshield. "Tell Mr. Sterling the land is solid. Tell him the view is $1 million. Tell him to wire the money. Because once that money leaves his account and lands in Vanessa's greed-infested hands, the trap snaps shut." I started the truck and turned it around. I drove back to the motel. Beatrice was waiting. "Did you do it?" she asked. "I did," I said. "Did they see you?" "Brad saw me. He called me crazy." "And the engineers, they confirmed the line." Beatrice smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "So it is set," she said. "It is set," I replied. "Now we just wait for the ink to dry." I lay down on the lumpy motel bed. I closed my eyes. I could still hear the sound of the sledgehammer. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like the bell at the start of a boxing match. Round 1 was the eviction. Round 2 was the doctor. Round 3 was the stake. Round 4 was coming on Friday. And that was going to be the knockout. They say that denial is a powerful drug, but it is nothing compared to the intoxication of unearned wealth. My daughter and her husband were addicts in the final stages of an overdose. They were high on a future that did not exist. I sat in the motel room on Thursday watching the rain streak the window while my phone buzzed with the evidence of their self-destruction. Every vibration was another nail in their coffin, another notification from the bank that they were spending money that wasn't theirs on a life they couldn't afford. Thaddeus had told me to let them dig their hole. He said to give them enough rope. But as I watched the transaction logs, I realized they weren't just hanging themselves. They were setting themselves on fire and dancing in the flames. The crisis started at 9 in the morning. I know this because I have a friend in the security department of Brad's firm. He told me later that Brad received a phone call that turned his face the color of old ash. It was the chief financial officer. The corporate audit had been moved up. The auditors weren't coming on Tuesday. They were coming on Monday morning. Brad had 48 hours. 48 hours to replace the $500,000 he had embezzled or face federal charges. I imagined the scene in my kitchen, the panic, the shouting, Brad pacing the heart pine floors I had laid, sweating through his expensive shirt, realizing that the walls were closing in. He needed cash. He needed it fast, and the only cash available was the $100,000 deposit from Arthur Sterling. The deposit was legally untouchable. It was escrow money. Spending it was theft by conversion, a felony in the state of Georgia. But a drowning man doesn't care about the law. He only cares about air. My phone buzzed. Transfer alert, $85,000 to account ending in 4490. I looked at the code. Account 4490 was Brad's private checking account, the one he used to pay his bookie, the one he used to hide his sins. He had drained the deposit. He had bullied Vanessa into breaking the law to save his skin. I could hear his voice in my head, manipulating her, twisting her loyalty until it snapped. "Do you want the father of your children to go to prison, Vanessa? It is just a loan. We will put it back on Friday when Sterling wires the millions." But $85,000 wasn't $500,000. It was a drop in the bucket. It was enough to bribe a lower-level accountant maybe, or pay off the most aggressive shark, but it wasn't enough to stop the audit. So what do desperate people do when they realize they can't stop the train? They decide to enjoy the ride until the crash. They went shopping. It sounds insane. It sounds like madness, but I have seen it before. When people know the end is coming, they retreat into fantasy. They try to build a reality where they are winners. My phone buzzed again at noon. Transaction: the Four Seasons Atlanta. Valet parking. They weren't at the office trying to solve their problem. They were in the city. Then came the big one. The one that made Beatrice gasp when I showed her the screen. Transaction: Skyline Realty Group. $15,000. They put a deposit down on a penthouse. I called Thaddeus immediately. "They are at the Millennium Tower," I said. "They just dropped 15 grand on a lease deposit." Thaddeus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "They are doubling down, Eli. They are convincing themselves that the closing on Friday is a guarantee. If they sign a lease for a $10,000 a month apartment, they feel rich. And if they feel rich, they don't feel like criminals." I drove into the city. I had to see it. I had to see the delusion with my own eyes. I parked my rusted truck a block away from the Millennium Tower. It was a glass needle piercing the sky, a monument to excess. I stood on the corner, pulling my collar up against the drizzle. I saw them come out. Brad was wearing his new Rolex. He was walking with a strut, a bounce in his step that screamed arrogance. Vanessa was on his arm, carrying her $12,000 bag, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her eyes. They looked like royalty. They looked like a power couple who owned the city. They didn't look like two people who had just stolen a deposit and were days away from homeless. I watched them stop on the sidewalk. Brad pointed up at the top of the building. He swept his arm across the horizon as if he were gifting her the skyline. "It is ours, baby," I could imagine him saying. "No more bugs, no more dirty lake water, no more old man breathing down our necks. We are at the top of the food chain." Vanessa smiled, but even from a block away I could see the tension in her jaw. She was smiling because she was terrified to stop. If she stopped smiling, she might scream. They got into the Mercedes and drove off toward a high-end furniture store. They were picking out sofas for a penthouse they would never live in, paid for with money that belonged to a man who was about to sue them into oblivion. I drove back to the motel feeling a heavy sadness in my chest. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the waste, the absolute waste of potential. I had raised Vanessa to value substance over style. I taught her that a house is only as strong as its foundation, and here she was building a castle on a cloud of lies. That night, the atmosphere in the motel room was tense. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the closing. Beatrice was pacing the small room. "Eli," she asked, wringing her hands, "are you sure this is going to work? What if Sterling doesn't care about the road? What if he buys it anyway?" "He cares, B," I said, polishing the handle of my sledgehammer. "He is a developer. Land without access is worthless. It is like buying a car without an engine." "But Vanessa," she said. "She is our daughter." I looked at my wife, the woman who had slept in a chair for 3 nights because she refused to lie in a bed that wasn't hers. "Vanessa made her choice," I said gently. "She chose Brad. She chose the Porsche. She chose the penthouse." I pulled out the orange spray paint can from my bag. I shook it. The rattle of the ball bearing inside sounded like a rattlesnake. "Tomorrow isn't about punishment, Beatrice," I said. "It is about education. I am going to teach them a lesson that no university can offer. I am going to teach them the difference between ownership and possession." My phone pinged one last time. Transaction Champagne Warehouse, $400. They were back at the lake house. They were drinking again. They were toasting to the future. I imagined them sitting on my deck looking out at the dark water. Brad would be telling her that everything was fixed, that the $85,000 he sent to the company would buy them time, that the $2.8 million wiring tomorrow would solve everything. "Just one more day, Ness," he would say. "Just survive until noon." They didn't know that noon was exactly when the clock would strike midnight. They didn't know that the road they drove on to get to the house, the asphalt ribbon that connected them to the world, was about to be cut. I turned off the lights in the motel room. "Get some sleep, Bea," I said. "We have a big day tomorrow." She lay down, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. "Eli," she whispered in the dark. "Yes, honey. Don't hurt them. Not physically. I won't touch them, I promised. I don't have to touch them to break them." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I ran the plan through my head over and over again. The timing had to be perfect. We had to wait until everyone was in the room. We had to wait until the pen was hovering over the paper. We had to wait until they could taste the money. Because the fall only hurts if you are standing on a high ledge. And Brad and Vanessa had spent the last 4 days climbing higher and higher, building a tower of debt and deceit. Tomorrow I was going to kick the ladder away. I thought about the orange line on the road. It was bright. It was aggressive. It was final. It was the line in the sand. They crossed it on Tuesday when they evicted us. Tomorrow, on Friday, they were going to find out that you can't cross back. The storm was over the lake now. I could hear the thunder rolling in the distance. It sounded like applause. Let them have their penthouse dreams tonight. Let them sleep on their silk sheets. Because tomorrow night they were going to learn that a motel room with a clean conscience is a luxury suite compared to a mansion built on a lie. The countdown was over. The gatekeeper was coming. And he was bringing the keys to the abyss. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sovereign building smelled of mahogany polish and money. It was a cold, sterile smell, the kind that makes you want to straighten your tie and check your bank balance. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see the entire city of Atlanta spread out like a circuit board, but nobody in the room was looking at the view. All eyes were on the heavy oak table in the center of the room where the future of my legacy was being decided with the stroke of a pen. I was not in the room yet. I was in the elevator rising steadily toward the sky. Next to me stood Thaddeus Moore, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck and carrying the leather portfolio that held the nuclear codes. On my other side stood Sheriff Miller. Not the deputy who had evicted me, but the sheriff himself, a man I had known for 30 years, a man who respected the law, but respected justice even more. And me. I was wearing my Sunday best, a charcoal three-piece suit tailored in 1985, but still sharp as a razor. I had polished my shoes until they shone like black glass. I wasn't the fisherman today. I wasn't the victim. I was the architect. Inside the conference room, the air was thick with tension and false celebration. My daughter Vanessa sat at the head of the table. She was wearing a white power suit that looked stark against her pale skin. Her hand was resting on a stack of documents 3 inches thick. To her right sat Brad. He was vibrating, literally vibrating. His leg was bouncing under the table, shaking the water pitcher. He was sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning. He kept checking his new Rolex, tapping the sapphire glass as if he could make time move faster. Across from them sat Arthur Sterling, the developer from New York. He looked bored. To him, this was just another Tuesday, just another acquisition, just another old house to crush. He was checking emails on his phone while his team of lawyers reviewed the final addendums. And in the corner, on a silver tray, sat a bottle of Dom Perignon on ice. The cork had already been popped. 3 crystal flutes were filled, bubbling with the promise of $2.8 million. I could imagine the conversation. I could hear Brad's voice in my head. "Just sign it, Vanessa," he would be whispering. "Just put the ink on the paper and we are free. The wire hits at noon. We pay the company back by 1. We are safe." Vanessa picked up the pen. It was a heavy black fountain pen provided by the law firm. She looked at the document. Deed of sale. She looked at the price. $2,800,000. She hesitated. Maybe for a second she thought about the swing set I built her in the backyard. Maybe she thought about the way the light hit the kitchen table in the morning. Or maybe she just thought about the prison cell waiting for her husband if she didn't sign. She lowered the pen to the paper. Mr. Sterling looked up. "Are we doing this?" he asked, his voice raspy and impatient. "I have a tea time at 3. "We are doing this," Brad said, his voice cracking slightly. "She is signing now." Vanessa took a deep breath. The nib of the pen touched the paper. Ink began to flow. Ding. The elevator doors opened down the hall. We walked down the corridor. Our footsteps were synchronized, the heavy thud of leather on marble. We didn't rush. We walked with the inevitability of a storm front. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Sir, you can't go in there," she squeaked. "That is a closed closing." Sheriff Miller didn't stop walking. He just touched the brim of his hat. "Official business, ma'am," he said. We reached the double mahogany doors. I looked at Thaddeus. He nodded. I looked at the sheriff. He placed a hand on his belt. I reached out and grabbed the brass handles. They were cold. I threw the doors open. Bam! The sound was like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Vanessa jumped so hard the pen skidded across the paper, leaving a jagged black scar across the signature line. Brad spun around in his chair, his eyes bulging. Arthur Sterling just looked up, annoyed. I stepped into the room. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, framing the doorway with my shoulders. I looked at the champagne. I looked at the stack of papers. And then I looked at my daughter. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. "Dad," Vanessa whispered. Her face went white, the color draining away until she looked like a ghost. What are you doing here?" Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. "Get out!" he screamed. His voice was high and hysterical. "You can't be here. This is a private meeting. Security. Someone call security." I walked into the room. Thaddeus and the sheriff followed me, flanking me like guardians. "Sit down, Brad," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and resonant. It filled the room, bouncing off the glass walls. "You don't tell me what to do," Brad yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are trespassing. You are senile. Vanessa, tell him to leave. Sign the papers. Ignore him," Mr. King Arthur Sterling said, standing up slowly. He looked from me to the sheriff. "I assume there is a reason you are interrupting a multi-million-dollar transaction with law enforcement." I looked at Sterling. "I am saving you a lot of money, Mr. Sterling," I said. "And I am saving you a lawsuit that would tie up your capital for the next 5 years. Sterling narrowed his eyes. He looked at Vanessa. "I thought you said he was in a facility." "He is supposed to be." Brad shouted. "He is crazy. He is incompetent." "Officer, remove him." Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He hooked his thumbs in his belt. He looked at Brad with a look of pure disdain. Mr. Miller, the sheriff, said, his voice heavy with authority. I suggest you lower your voice. I am not here to remove Mr. King. I am here to ensure the peace while he conducts his business. Business. Brad laughed, a manic, desperate sound. He has no business here. He doesn't own the house anymore. Vanessa has the power of attorney. She is the trustee. Thaddeus stepped forward. He placed his leather portfolio on the table right next to the champagne bottle. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the wood made everyone flinch. He opened it. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Actually, Thaddeus said, peering over his reading glasses, that is a matter of some debate. Vanessa stared at Thaddeus. She knew him. She knew he was a judge. She knew he was the smartest legal mind in the county. Her hand started to tremble. Judge Moore, she stammered. What is this? This, Thaddeus said, is a motion for an emergency injunction, but we haven't filed it yet. We wanted to give you a chance to do the right thing before we make this a matter of public record. Brad grabbed the deed of sale. She is signing it, he yelled. He tried to shove the pen back into Vanessa's hand. Sign it, Ness, right now. Once it is signed, it is done. They can't stop a closed deal. Vanessa looked at the pen. She looked at me. I stood at the end of the table. I looked at her with eyes that weren't angry anymore. They were just sad. Go ahead, Vanessa, I said softly. Brad froze. Vanessa looked up startled. What she whispered. Sign it, I said. I gestured to the paper. Mr. Sterling is waiting. The wire transfer is ready. You have spent the deposit. You have bought the purses and the watches. You have lived the life for 4 days. Finish it. Vanessa looked confused. She expected a fight. She expected me to scream. She didn't expect permission. Dad? I don't understand, she said. I walked closer. I placed my hands on the back of an empty leather chair. I am not here to stop you from selling the house, Vanessa. You have the power of attorney. You found the loophole. You found the doctor even though we stopped him. You found a way around it. You are smart. I raised you to be smart. I looked at Brad. And you are desperate. I know about the audit, Brad. I know about the $500,000. I know that if you don't walk out of this room with a check today, your life is over. Brad went pale. He looked at Sterling, who was now listening very intently. He is lying, Brad whispered. He is making it up. I ignored him. I kept my eyes on Vanessa. So sign it, I said. Sell the house. Take Mr. Sterling's money. But before you do, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. Before you put your name on that line, I need to show you one thing. I nodded to Thaddeus. Thaddeus reached into the portfolio again. He didn't pull out a legal brief. He pulled out a large rolled-up blueprint. He cleared the champagne glasses away. He unrolled the document in the center of the table. It was old. The edges were frayed. It smelled of ammonia and age. It was the original site plan from 1985. Sterling leaned forward. He recognized a survey map when he saw one. What is this? Sterling asked. This, Thaddeus said, is the original subdivision plat for the King estate. He pointed to a thick black line that ran across the property. You see this line, Mr. Sterling? Thaddeus asked. Yes, Sterling said. That is the access road. The driveway. Correct, Thaddeus said. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa, do you remember when you were a little girl and you asked me why the driveway was so long? Vanessa nodded slowly, entranced by the map. I told you it was because your father wanted to build a bridge between the world and his sanctuary. Thaddeus tapped the map. Well, legally speaking, that is exactly what he did. He looked at the lawyers in the room. Gentlemen, have you reviewed the title search for Parcel B? The lead lawyer for Sterling frowned. Parcel B. There is no Parcel B. The deed is for Lot 42. Thaddeus smiled. Lot 42 contains the house, Thaddeus said. But the road sits on a strip of land that was retained by the original grantor. He looked at me. Eli, would you like to explain? I walked to the map. I placed my finger on the spot where I had driven the stake yesterday. I own the road, I said. The room went silent. Excuse me, Sterling said. I own the road, I repeated. When I set up the trust, I kept the access easement in my name. Personal property. Not trust property. I looked at Vanessa. Your power of attorney covers the trust, Vanessa. It covers the house. It covers the furniture. But it does not cover the road. I looked at Brad. So here's the situation. You can sell the house. You can sell it right now. But the moment you sign that paper, I am closing the road. Closing it, Brad scoffed. You can't close a driveway. I can, I said, and I will. I put a stake in it yesterday. Tomorrow I will put up a gate, a steel gate, and I will lock it. I turned to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, if you buy this house, you will own a beautiful mansion. But you will have to buy a helicopter to get to it. Because if one of your bulldozers touches my asphalt, I will have the sheriff here arrest them for trespassing. Sterling looked at his lawyers. Is this true? He demanded. The lawyers were frantically flipping through their files. One of them was typing on a laptop. My God, the lawyer whispered. He is right. There is a separate deed for the access strip. It was filed in 1985. It was never consolidated. Sterling's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He turned on Vanessa. You told me the title was clean, he shouted. You told me there were no encumbrances. I didn't know, Vanessa cried, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know about the road. Dad never told me. I looked at her. I didn't tell you because I trusted you, I said. I didn't think I needed to protect myself from my own daughter. Brad slammed his hand on the table. This is blackmail, he screamed. This is extortion. You are sabotaging the deal. I am not sabotaging anything I said. I am just enforcing my property rights. The same way you enforced yours when you kicked me out. I looked at the clock. It was 11:45. You have 15 minutes, Brad, I said. Sign the papers. But if you do, Mr. Sterling is going to sue you for fraud the minute he finds out he bought a landlocked island. Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Vanessa and Brad with pure loathing. There will be no signing, he said. The deal is dead. No, Brad shouted, grabbing Sterling's arm. Please, we can fix this. We can pay him for the road. We can work it out. Get your hands off me, Sterling snapped. He looked at his lawyers. Cancel the wire and get my deposit back immediately. The room froze. The deposit, the $100,000, the money they had already spent. Sterling looked at Brad. I wired you $100,000 as a good faith deposit. Return it. Now. Brad looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at the floor. We don't have it right now, Brad whispered. It is tied up. In escrow. Escrow. Sterling barked. You are the escrow agent, Vanessa. Write me a check. Vanessa sobbed. I can't. Why not? Sterling demanded. Because they spent it, Thaddeus said quietly from the corner. Sterling looked at them. His eyes went wide. You spent my deposit. Brad tried to speak, but no sound came out. That is theft, Sterling roared. That is grand larceny. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff, are you hearing this? They stole my money. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. The handcuffs on his belt jingled. I am hearing it, mister. Sterling, he said. I stood back. The trap had snapped. The jaws were closed. I looked at Vanessa. She was weeping her head in her hands. I looked at Brad. He was staring at the wall, seeing his life crumble into dust. I told you, Vanessa, I whispered. You can't sell what isn't yours. I turned to walk out. The closing was over, but the justice was just beginning. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a bomb blast, where the ringing in your ears is the only sound you can hear. I stood at the end of the mahogany table, my hands resting on the back of the leather chair, looking at the people who had conspired to steal my life. My daughter Vanessa held the pen hovering over the signature line of the deed. Brad was sweating so profusely that drops were hitting the polished wood table. Arthur Sterling looked confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to calculate the angle I was playing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I was the architect, and I was simply walking them through the structural failure of their plan. I told you to sign it, Vanessa, I said softly. Go ahead. Sell the house. Take the money. Vanessa looked at me, her eyes wide and wet with tears. She didn't understand. She expected me to scream. She expected me to beg. She didn't expect me to open the door for her. But Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling, if I sign this, you lose everything. You lose the house. I smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind a father gives a child who has just broken a precious vase and doesn't yet realize the consequences. I lose the house. I agreed. I lose the wood and the glass and the stone. But before you touch that pen to the paper, I need you to understand exactly what you are selling. And more importantly, I need Mr. Sterling to understand exactly what he is buying. I nodded to Thaddeus. My old friend stepped forward. He placed the leather portfolio on the table, pushing aside the bottle of Dom Perignon that had gone warm. He unzipped the case with a slow, deliberate sound that sounded like a zipper on a body bag. He pulled out a large, rolled document. It wasn't a modern computer printout. It was blue paper smelling of ammonia and age. Thaddeus unrolled the blueprint. He weighed down the corners with the crystal champagne flutes. "Gentlemen," Thaddeus said, adjusting his glasses, "this is the original subdivision plat for the King Estate filed with the Hall County Clerk in 1985. Sterling leaned forward. He was a developer. He knew how to read a survey. His eyes scanned the white lines on the blue background. "I see the lot," Sterling said impatiently. "Lot 42, 2.5 acres, waterfront. That is what I am buying." I walked around the table. I stood next to Sterling. I pointed a calloused finger at the map. "You are buying Lot 42A, I corrected. That is the parcel the house sits on. It includes the footprint of the structure, the backyard, and the dock." I traced my finger down the map to the long, winding line that connected the house to the main road. "But this," I said, tapping the line, "this is the access road, the driveway. It is 2 miles long. It winds through the forest and climbs 300 feet in elevation." "So what?" Brad snapped, his voice high and jittery. "It is a driveway. It comes with the house." "Does it?" I asked, looking at him. I looked at Vanessa. "Vanessa, do you remember the story I told you about Uncle Marcus?" Vanessa blinked, confused by the sudden shift to family history. "Uncle Marcus?" she stammered. "He lost his farm." "He lost his farm," I said, "because he didn't control the access. His neighbor bought the right-of-way and choked him out. Marcus couldn't get his trucks in to harvest the corn. He went bankrupt in a year." I looked back at the map. I learned from that, Vanessa. "When I bought this land 40 years ago, I didn't buy it as one piece. I was paranoid. I wanted insurance, so I split the deed." I tapped the map again hard. "The house sits on Lot A. That land was placed into the King Family Trust. That is the trust you now control with your power of attorney." I moved my finger to the road. "But the road sits on Lot B." I looked at Sterling. "Lot B was never placed in the trust. Lot B is titled to Elijah King as an individual. It is my personal property. It is not an asset of the trust. It is not subject to the power of attorney. And it is definitely not for sale." The room went deadly quiet. Sterling looked at his lead attorney, a young man in a sharp suit who was currently turning a sickly shade of green. "Is he telling the truth?" Sterling demanded. The lawyer was frantically typing on his laptop, accessing the county property records. His fingers flew across the keys. He stopped. He stared at the screen. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling," the lawyer whispered, "he is right. There are 2 parcel ID numbers. The deed for the access strip, it is in Mr. King's name solely. It was never consolidated with the residential lot." Brad jumped up. "That is a technicality," he screamed. "It is a clerical error. It is an easement by necessity. You can't landlock a property. A judge will grant us access." Thaddeus laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Actually," young man, Thaddeus said, pulling another document from his file, "a judge might grant access if there wasn't a specific clause in the original filing waiving that right." He held up the yellowed paper. "Clause 12, the Gatekeeper Clause. It explicitly states that access to Lot A is revocable at the sole discretion of the owner of Lot B. It was signed by the grantor and the beneficiary. It is ironclad." I looked at Brad. "I am the gatekeeper, Brad, and I am closing the gate." I turned to Sterling. "So here is the situation, Mr. Sterling. You can buy the house. You can wire the $2.8 million to my daughter. She can pay off her debts. She can buy her penthouse." I leaned in close, my face inches from his. "But tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I am installing a steel gate at the bottom of that hill. I am putting up a no trespassing sign. And if one of your bulldozers, if one of your trucks, even one of your surveyors crosses onto my asphalt, I will have them arrested for criminal trespass." Sterling stared at me. His mouth hung slightly open. "You can't do that," he whispered. "I can," I said, "and I will." I gestured to the window to the skyline of the city. "You want to build a resort, Mr. Sterling? How are you going to get the concrete trucks up there? How are you going to get the lumber up there? Are you going to fly it in? I laughed. You can buy the house, sir, but unless you have a fleet of heavy-lift helicopters, that property is useless to you. It is an island in a sea of land that I own, and I am not selling a single inch of it. Brad slammed his hands on the table, rattling the glasses. You are bluffing, he yelled. You are just a bitter old man. You wouldn't destroy your own property value just to spite us. I looked at Brad. I looked at the sweat staining his collar. I looked at the fear in his eyes. You think this is about spite, Brad? I asked. I walked over to the window. I looked out at the city. This isn't about spite. It is about consequences. You tried to erase me. You tried to throw me away like trash. You thought I was weak because I was old. You thought I was stupid because I was quiet. I turned back to face them. But you forgot that I built that world. I drew the lines. I poured the concrete. Did you really think you could steal my creation without understanding how it was put together? I looked at Vanessa. She had dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell to the floor with a soft click. Dad, she sobbed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you didn't ask, I said. You didn't ask for my help. You didn't ask for my advice. You just took. You took the authority. You took the dignity. You took the home. I walked back to the table. I picked up the blueprint. I rolled it up slowly, methodically. So go ahead, I said. Sign the deed. I looked at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, my road is closed, permanently. If you buy this house, you are buying a prison. You will own a beautiful view and a rotting structure that you can never touch. Sterling stood up. His face was red. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked at his lawyers. Tell me he can't do this, Sterling barked. Tell me there is a loophole. The lawyer shook his head. If he owns the strip in fee simple, Mr. Sterling, and if that clause is valid, we are stuck. We would have to litigate for years to get an easement, and in the meantime we can't build. We can't even drive up there to inspect it. Sterling looked at the champagne. He grabbed a glass and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, showering the room in crystal shards and expensive wine. He turned on Vanessa. You lied to me, he roared. You told me the title was clean. You told me you had full authority. I thought I did, Vanessa cried. I swear, Mr. Sterling, I didn't know about the second lot. Ignorance is not a defense, Sterling shouted. This is fraud. You induced me to enter a contract under false pretenses. You wasted my time. You wasted my team's time. He looked at Brad. And you took my money. Brad shrank back in his chair. We can fix this, Mr. Sterling. We can pay Eli for the road. We can make a deal. I shook my head. The road is not for sale, Brad. Not for $1 million. Not for $10 million. I picked up my hat. I placed it on my head. I am an architect, Brad. I build things to last, and I build walls to keep the wolves out. I looked at Sterling. If I were you, sir, I would be very concerned about that deposit. I turned to walk away. Sheriff Miller opened the door for me. Thaddeus packed up his papers, giving a polite nod to the terrified lawyers. We left them in that room. The champagne was spilling on the floor. The deed was unsigned. The pen was on the ground. And the silence. The silence was broken only by the sound of Brad's heavy breathing, realizing that the walls were finally closing in. I walked down the hall. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had closed the gate, and now I was going to watch them crash into it. The sound of expensive crystal shattering against the wall was the opening bell for the final round. Arthur Sterling was not a man who was used to losing. He was a man who built skyscrapers and bulldozed neighborhoods. He was a predator in the concrete jungle, and he had just realized that he had walked into a bear trap set by a 71-year-old architect in a vintage suit. The silence that followed the crash of the champagne glass was heavy and suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but it did nothing to cool the sudden inferno of rage that was radiating from the developer. Sterling turned slowly from the window where I had just pointed out his logistical nightmare. He looked at the map on the table. He looked at the thick black line that represented my road. And then he turned his gaze upon my daughter. If looks could kill, Vanessa would have been dust on the floor. You withheld material facts, Sterling said, his voice dangerously low. It was a growl deep in his throat like a tiger about to pounce. You stood there in my office 3 days ago. You looked me in the eye, and you told me this property was turnkey. Vanessa trembled. She was clutching the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles were white. Mr. Sterling, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I swear. I didn't know. My father, he never told me about the second deed. I thought the trust owned everything. Ignorance is not a defense in a commercial transaction, Sterling roared, slamming his hand down on the stack of legal documents. You are a licensed real estate agent, Mrs. Miller. It is your job to know. It is your fiduciary duty to investigate the title. Did you pull the survey? Did you check the county plat? Brad jumped in trying to be the hero but sounding like a cornered rat. We checked the tax records, Brad said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. The tax records show one address. It was an honest mistake. An honest mistake, Sterling laughed, a harsh barking sound that lacked any humor. An honest mistake is a typo on a contract, Brad. An honest mistake is getting the zip code wrong. Selling me a $3 million house that I cannot access without a helicopter is not a mistake. It is fraud. Sterling grabbed the seller's disclosure statement, the document Vanessa had signed just 20 minutes ago. He waved it in her face. Look at this, he shouted. Paragraph 4. Access and easements. Question. Are there any encroachments or boundary disputes affecting the property? Answer. No. He threw the paper at her. It hit her chest and fluttered to the floor, landing next to the broken glass. You lied, Sterling said. You committed perjury on a legal document. Do you know what that means? It means this contract is void. It means this deal is dead, and it means you represent a liability I'm going to crush. He reached for the deed of sale, the paper Vanessa was seconds away from signing. He picked it up. He didn't just toss it aside. He gripped it with both hands and ripped it down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the room like a bone snapping. He tore it again and again until the sale of my home was nothing but confetti raining down on the expensive carpet. I am walking away, Sterling said, brushing his hands off as if they were dirty. I am not buying your island. I am not buying your prison. I am not dealing with amateurs who try to hustle me. He turned to his team of lawyers who were already packing up their laptops, looking terrified of their boss's wrath. Pack it up, he ordered. We are leaving. Call the helicopter. I want to be out of the city in an hour. Brad stood up. His face was gray. He looked like a man watching his life support system being unplugged. Wait, Brad begged, reaching out a hand. Mr. Sterling, please. Don't leave. We can fix this. We can talk to Eli. We can buy the road from him. I stood by the door, my arms crossed. The road is not for sale, Brad, I said calmly. Brad ignored me, keeping his desperate eyes on Sterling. We will sue him, Brad cried. We will get a court order. It will just take a few months. Stick with us. The land is worth it. Sterling stopped. He turned back to Brad. He looked at him with pure disgust. A few months, Sterling repeated. You think I have a few months to wait while you fight a family war in probate court. I operate on speed, Brad. Capital that sits still is capital that dies. I am done. He straightened his tie. But before I go, Sterling said, his voice turning icy cold, there is one small matter of housekeeping. He stepped closer to the table, looming over Brad and Vanessa. The deposit. My heart didn't beat faster, but I felt the rhythm of the room change. This was it, the moment of impact. I wired you $100,000 on Tuesday, Sterling said, holding out his hand, palm up. It was a gesture of demand, a gesture that expected immediate payment. Return it, now. Brad froze. He stopped breathing. I could see the panic rising in his eyes like floodwater. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at the floor. Well, Sterling asked, snapping his fingers. I am waiting. Get your phone out. Open your banking app. Reverse the wire. I want that money back in my account before I get to the elevator. Brad licked his dry lips. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace of pain. Mr. Sterling, Brad said, his voice shaking. It doesn't work like that. The money, it is in the escrow account. It takes time to process a reversal. The banks, you know how banks are. Sterling didn't blink. He was a shark, and he smelled fear. Don't give me that garbage, Brad Sterling snapped. It was a wire transfer. You are the acting trustee. You control the account. You can wire it back instantly, unless... He stopped. His eyes narrowed. He looked from Brad to Vanessa. He looked at the new Rolex gleaming on Brad's wrist under the fluorescent lights. He looked at the brand new Hermes bag sitting on the chair next to Vanessa. He looked at me. I just nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible nod. Sterling turned back to them, his face darkening with rage. "You spent it, didn't you?" he whispered. The realization hit him, and it made him more dangerous than if he had been screaming. "No," Brad stammered, backing away. "No, absolutely not. It is safe. It is just tied up." "Show me," Sterling commanded. "What?" Brad squeaked. "Show me the account," Sterling shouted. "Open your phone right now. Log in. Show me the balance. If there is $100,000 in that account, I will walk away and let the lawyers handle the breach of contract." He stepped closer, invading Brad's personal space. "But if I look at that screen and I see anything less than 6 figures, I am not calling my lawyer. I am calling the district attorney." Brad didn't move. He couldn't move. He knew what was on that screen. He knew the balance was less than $15,000. The rest was on his wrist in Vanessa's closet and in the deposit for a penthouse they would never see. Vanessa put her head in her hands and began to sob. It was a low, broken sound, the sound of a woman who realizes she has gambled her life and lost. "Oh God," she wept. "Oh God, Brad." Sterling looked at her. He didn't need to see the phone. Her tears were the confession. "You stole my money," Sterling said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion now. It was just a statement of fact. Theft by conversion. Grand larceny. In the state of Georgia, that is a felony with a mandatory prison sentence. He pulled out his own phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He dialed 3 digits. 911. Brad lunged. It was a pathetic, instinctual move. He grabbed Sterling's arm, trying to stop the call. "Don't." Brad begged, tears streaming down his face now. "Please, Mr. Sterling, I can pay you back. I just need time. Give me a week. Just 1 week." Sterling shoved him away. Brad stumbled and fell back into his chair, knocking it over again. "Don't touch me, you thief," Sterling spat. He put the phone to his ear. "Yes," Sterling said into the phone, his eyes locking onto Brad's terrified face. "I would like to report a crime. I am at the Sovereign Building Attorney offices. I have 2 individuals here who have embezzled $100,000. Yes, I will hold." He looked at Sheriff Miller, who was standing next to me. Sheriff Sterling said, "You are here on official business, right?" "I am Mr. Sterling," the sheriff said calmly. "Well, you can add this to your report," Sterling said. "These 2 grifters just confessed to spending my deposit. I want them arrested. I want to press charges immediately." Brad looked at me. He looked at the man he had called senile, the man he had evicted, the man he had laughed at. "Eli," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Eli, please, help us. You have money. You have savings. Write him a check. Please, Eli. I will do anything. We will give you the house back. Just pay him. Don't let me go to jail." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat dripping off his nose. I looked at the Rolex watch that cost $18,000 of stolen money. I walked over to him. I stood over him, looking down like a judge from the bench. "You want me to pay him?" I asked softly. "Yes," Brad cried, nodding frantically. "Yes, please. You are family. You can't let family go to prison." I looked at Vanessa. She was looking up at me too, her mascara running down her cheeks, hope flaring in her eyes. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my wallet. They watched me breathless. They thought I was going to pull out a checkbook. They thought I was going to be the savior one last time. I opened the wallet. I pulled out a single crisp dollar bill. I dropped it on the table in front of Brad. It floated down slowly, landing on the polished wood. "That is for the bus fare," I said. "What?" Brad whispered, staring at the dollar. "I am not paying your debts, Brad," I said. "I built my house with my own hands. You dug your grave with yours. Now you have to lie in it." I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Miller, I believe Mr. Sterling has made a formal complaint." The sheriff stepped forward. The jingle of his handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "Brad Miller, Vanessa King Miller," he said, his voice heavy with duty. "Stand up." "No," Vanessa screamed, clinging to the table. "No, Dad, please. Not this. Anything but this." I turned my back on them. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I heard the scuffle. I heard the click of the metal cuffs. I heard Brad reciting his rights in a panic and Vanessa sobbing my name. But I didn't turn around. I looked at the horizon. The storm clouds were clearing. The sun was starting to break through. They had spent the future. They had spent the money. They had spent my patience. And now the bill had finally come due. I heard the heavy door open and the sheriff escorting them out. Their footsteps were heavy dragging. Sterling was still in the room. He was breathing hard, straightening his suit. "Mr. King," he said. I turned to face him. "I apologize for the disruption," I said. Sterling looked at me. He looked at the blueprint on the table. He looked at the steel in my eyes. "You played a hard game, Mr. King," Sterling said. "You cost me time. You cost me a deal." "I saved you from a bad investment," I corrected. Sterling paused. He nodded slowly. "I suppose you did. A house without a road is just a pile of bricks." He picked up his briefcase. "You keep your road, Mr. King," he said, "and keep your house. I have a feeling nobody's going to take it from you as long as you are breathing." He walked out. I was alone in the room with Thaddeus. The wreckage of the deal was all around us. Thaddeus picked up the dollar bill I had left on the table. He handed it back to me. "You might need this," he said, smiling. I took it. I put it back in my wallet. "No, Thaddeus," I said. I looked at the empty chairs where my children had sat. I think I got my change back. The room was spinning, not for me, but for them. You could see it in their eyes, that glassy, unfocused look of people who have been hit by a train and are still trying to figure out which way is up. Arthur Sterling had just accused them of a felony. The sheriff was standing by the door, hand resting on his handcuffs. The deal of the century. The $2.8 million golden parachute that was supposed to save Brad from prison and buy Vanessa her penthouse had just disintegrated into confetti on the floor. But I wasn't done. You see, stopping the sale was just the defense. It was the shield that protected my home. But a shield doesn't win a war. To win a war, you need a sword. And Thaddeus Moore, my oldest friend and the sharpest legal mind in Georgia, was holding the blade. The silence in the room was broken only by Vanessa's quiet sobbing. She was slumped in her chair, the white power suit now looking like a crumpled napkin. Brad was staring at the table, his face a mask of sweaty terror. Thaddeus stepped forward. He didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked directly at Vanessa. "Mrs. Miller," Thaddeus said, his voice calm and precise like a surgeon cutting through skin. "You seem to be under the impression that your legal troubles are limited to Mr. Sterling's deposit." Vanessa looked up. Her mascara was running black streaks down her cheeks. "What? What do you mean?" she whispered. Thaddeus opened his leather portfolio again. He didn't pull out a blueprint this time. He pulled out a medical file. It was thick. It was stamped with the seal of the Emory University Neurology Department. On Monday, Thaddeus said, holding the file up for the room to see, "You attempted to have your father declared incapacitated by a Dr. Thorne. That attempt failed because your father is as sharp as a tack and Dr. Thorne is a fraud who is currently under investigation by the medical board thanks to a phone call I made yesterday." Brad flinched. He knew Thorne. He knew what that meant. However, Thaddeus continued, "We didn't stop there. Anticipating that you might try to find another doctor to lie for you, Elijah voluntarily submitted himself to a comprehensive forensic competency evaluation yesterday afternoon." Thaddeus opened the file. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It stopped right in front of Vanessa. "Read it," Thaddeus commanded. Vanessa looked at the paper through her tears. "Cognitive score 30 out of 30, Thaddeus recited. "No evidence of dementia, no evidence of cognitive decline. Superior executive function for a man of his age." He leaned in close, placing his hands on the table. "Your father is not crazy, Vanessa. He is not senile. He is fully competent. And under Georgia law, that simple fact changes everything about your legal standing in this room." Thaddeus turned to me. "Eli, do you wish to make a declaration?" I stepped forward. I looked at my daughter, the daughter I had carried on my shoulders, the daughter I had taught to fish. "I, Elijah King," I said, my voice steady and cold, "hereby revoke the durable power of attorney granted to Vanessa King Miller effective immediately." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a document Thaddeus had prepared. It was the revocation of power of attorney. I had signed it an hour ago in the presence of a notary. I slammed it down on the table. "You are fired, Vanessa," I said. "You have no authority over my money. You have no authority over my medical care. And you certainly have no authority to sell my house." Vanessa flinched as if I had hit her. But the trust," she stammered. "I am the successor trustee. The document says if you act against the interest of the trust." Thaddeus laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that echoed in the quiet room. "I am glad you brought up the trust, Mrs. Miller," Thaddeus said, "because that brings us to your second and far more serious problem." He walked around the table, pacing like a tiger circling its prey. "You see," Thaddeus began, A trustee has a fiduciary duty. That means you are legally required to act in the best interest of the beneficiary, in this case, your father. He pointed to the shredded remains of the sale contract on the floor. You attempted to sell a trust asset, the house, to Mr. Sterling here, but you did so by concealing a material fact, the lack of access, the easement issue. Thaddeus turned to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, if you had bought this house and found out later that it was landlocked, what would you have done? Sterling looked up from his phone where he was undoubtedly texting his legal team. I would have sued the trust into bankruptcy, Sterling said flatly. I would have taken every dime. Exactly, Thaddeus said, turning back to Vanessa. You risk the entire asset, Thaddeus said, his voice rising. By committing fraud, by failing to disclose the easement, you exposed the King family trust to massive liability. You didn't protect the asset, Vanessa. You endangered it. You engaged in self-dealing, trying to sell it fast to pay your husband's gambling debts. That is not just bad management. That is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is gross negligence. Brad wiped his mouth. So what? Brad mumbled. So she is fired as trustee. Big deal. We still have the inheritance. When the old man dies, we get it all anyway. I looked at Brad. I looked at the greed that was so deeply embedded in his soul that even at rock bottom he was still calculating his payout. You think you are waiting for me to die, Brad? I asked. I walked over to the chair where I had left my hat. I picked up the final document, the one I had prayed I would never have to use. Thaddeus, I said, explain the amendment. Thaddeus nodded. He looked at Brad with pity. You are right, Brad, Thaddeus said. Usually beneficiaries are protected. But the King Family Trust is a revocable living trust. Do you know what the word revocable means? Brad stared at him blankly. It means Thaddeus said that the grantor Elijah King can change it at any time. He can add beneficiaries, and he can remove them. I walked back to the table. I placed the document in front of them. Amendment to the King Family Trust. This morning, I said, looking at Vanessa, I instructed Thaddeus to draft this amendment. It removes Vanessa King Miller and Brad Miller as beneficiaries of the trust. Vanessa gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dad, she choked out. No, you can't. That is everything. The land, the savings, the life insurance. It is gone, Vanessa, I said. All of it. I pulled a pen from my pocket. It wasn't a Mont Blanc. It was a simple Bic pen I bought at the hardware store. I signed the bottom of the page. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the sound of a legacy being severed. Thaddeus signed as the witness. Sheriff Miller signed as the second witness. It is done, I said, capping the pen. I looked at them. You wanted the money so bad you were willing to destroy your family for it, I said. You were willing to throw your mother out on the street. You were willing to put me in a nursing home. I leaned in close. So now you have exactly what you deserve. Nothing. Brad stood up. He was shaking. You can't do this, he screamed. We have rights. We are family. You can't just cut us off. We are broke, Eli. We have nothing. If I don't pay that money back on Monday, then you face the consequences, Brad. I said, I am not your bank anymore. I am not your safety net. I looked at Vanessa. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, rocking back and forth in her chair. Dad, please, she begged. I am your daughter. I am your only child. Don't do this. We will lose the condo. We will lose the cars. We will be on the street. I felt a tear form in my own eye. I let it fall. I didn't wipe it away. I know, Vanessa, I whispered. I remembered 3 days ago. I remembered seeing Beatrice sitting on a trash bag crying because she had nowhere to go. I remembered the cold indifference in Vanessa's voice when she told us to go to a motel. You told us the apartment in East Point was cozy, I said softly. Vanessa froze. She looked up at me, remembering her own cruelty. You said it was small but easy to clean, I continued. Maybe you should look into it, I said. I hear the rent is reasonable. I picked up the amendment. I handed it to Thaddeus. File it, I said. Consider it done, Thaddeus said, zipping up the portfolio. I looked at Sterling. He was watching the scene with a look of grudging respect. He had seen business deals go bad, but he had never seen a family dissection performed with such surgical precision. Mr. Sterling, I said, I believe you have a deposit to recover. Sterling nodded. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. I do indeed, Mr. King. He turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Miller, Sterling said. I would like to proceed with the charges now. theft, fraud, and whatever else you can find in the Georgia Penal Code. The sheriff stepped forward. Brad Miller. Vanessa King. Miller, he said, his voice booming in the small room. You are under arrest. Vanessa screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. Brad tried to run. He actually turned toward the door, but he tripped over his own feet, the feet that were shaking so hard they couldn't support him. He fell to the floor right in front of the sheriff's boots. I turned away. I couldn't watch the handcuffs go on, not because I felt guilty, but because it is a terrible thing to watch a human being collapse under the weight of their own sins. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city of Atlanta. The sun was fully out now. It was shining on the glass and steel. It was a beautiful day. Behind me, I heard the click of the cuffs. I heard Brad begging. I heard Vanessa calling for her mother, but her mother wasn't there. Her mother was in a motel room praying for a miracle. And the miracle had happened. The house was safe. The land was safe. But the family was gone. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Thaddeus. Are you okay, Eli? He asked softly. I took a deep breath. I am free, Thaddeus, I said. I looked at the reflection of my daughter in the glass as they dragged her out of the room. She wanted to be independent, I said. She wanted to be in charge. Well, I said, turning away from the window, now she is on her own. Let's go home, Thaddeus. I have a gate to build. The sound of handcuffs locking into place is a unique mechanical click that signals the end of freedom and the beginning of a long, dark nightmare. It is a sound that cuts through sobbing and begging and bargaining like a knife through silk. I stood in the corner of that opulent conference room, 42 stories above the streets of Atlanta, and I watched the final act of a tragedy I had written, but prayed I would never have to direct. Arthur Sterling was not a man to be trifled with. He was standing by the window talking to someone on his cell phone, his voice clipped and efficient. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was past anger. He was in execution mode. He was listing transaction numbers and wire transfer codes. He was building a cage out of numbers and handing the key to the district attorney. When he hung up, he turned to the room. He looked at Brad, who was huddled in his chair looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. He looked at Vanessa, who was staring at her hands as if she had never seen them before. You two are remarkable, Sterling said, adjusting his cufflinks. Truly remarkable. I have dealt with thieves before. I have dealt with con artists, but usually they have an exit strategy. You two just drove a car off a cliff and expected gravity to take a day off. He pointed a finger at Brad. I just got off the phone with my forensic accountant, Sterling said. We traced the funds, the $100,000 I wired on Tuesday. It didn't go into an escrow account. It went into your personal checking account. And from there, it went to the Porsche dealership, to the Hermes store, and to a landlord at the Millennium Tower. Brad shook his head violently, sweat flying from his brow. It was a loan, Brad choked out. It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back today. Once the deal closed, I was going to replace every cent. That is not a loan, Brad Sterling said, his voice cold as ice. That is embezzlement. That is using client funds for personal gain. And since you crossed state lines with that wire transfer, it is also wire fraud. Do you know what the sentencing guidelines are for federal wire fraud? Brad didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He was a big man, a wall of tan uniform and brass badges. He had been patient. He had let the civil drama play out. But now a felony had been reported in his presence. Now it was police work. Brad Miller, the sheriff, said, reaching for his belt. Stand up. Turn around. No. Brad whimpered. He grabbed the edge of the table. No, please. We can work this out. Eli. He spun around to face me. His eyes were wide and wet with terror. Eli, help me, he begged. You have money. I know you have retirement savings. Write him a check, please. I will pay you back. I swear on my life I will pay you back. Just don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I am soft, Eli. I won't survive in there. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me senile, the man who had ash on my teak deck, the man who had evicted my wife. I am not your bank, Brad, I said softly, and I am not your father. But we are family, he screamed. No, I said. We were family. Then you stole from me. Then you insulted me. And then you tried to sell my home to save your own skin because you were too weak to face your own mistakes. I looked at the Rolex on his wrist. Give the man his watch back, Brad, I said. What? He gasped, clutching his wrist. "The watch," I said. "You bought it with his money. Take it off." Sheriff Miller didn't wait. He grabbed Brad's arm. He spun him around. He wrenched the arm behind Brad's back with a force that made Brad yelp in pain. Click. The first cuff locked. Brad started to cry. It was a pathetic, ugly sound. A high-pitched keen that sounded like a wounded animal. Vanessa screamed. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a scream of realization. She was watching her husband, her partner in crime, being shackled like a common criminal. And then the sheriff turned to her. "Vanessa King Miller," he said. "Stand up." Vanessa froze. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at me. "Me," she whispered, pointing to her chest. "Why me?" "I didn't spend the money. Brad spent it. I just wanted to sell the house." "You are the trustee," Vanessa Sterling interjected. "Or you were until 10 minutes ago. You controlled the account. You signed the checks. You are an accomplice to fraud, and you are a co-conspirator in the theft. You held the bag while he filled it." "No." Vanessa sobbed. "No, I didn't know. He told me it was okay." "Ignorance is not a defense," the sheriff said, pulling her chair back. "Stand up, ma'am. Don't make me drag you." Vanessa stood up. Her legs were shaking so hard I thought she would fall. She held out her hands, palms up, begging. "Dad," she cried. "Dad, please, look at this. They are arresting me, your daughter, your little girl." I stood there leaning on my walking stick. I felt a pain in my chest that was sharper than any heart attack. This was my child. This was the baby I had rocked to sleep. This was the girl I had walked to the bus stop. And now I was watching her be put in chains. "Dad, do something," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Tell them to stop. Pay the money. I will do anything. I will sign the house back over. I will never ask for anything again. Just save me. Please, Daddy, save me." The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. Even Sterling, even the sheriff. They were waiting to see if the father would break. They were waiting to see if love was stronger than justice. I walked over to her. I stood inches from her face. I could smell her expensive perfume. I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear she used to have when she woke up from a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was the life she had chosen. I looked at her deep into her soul. "Vanessa," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I could forgive you for selling the house. It is just wood and stone. I could build another one." I paused. I let the silence hang in the air. "I could forgive you for the money," I continued. "Money is just paper. It comes and goes." I looked at her tear-stained face. "I could even forgive you for selling my favorite sofa, the one I sat on to read you bedtime stories." Vanessa nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. "But Vanessa," I said, my voice hardening into steel, "I will never forgive you for making your mother cry." Vanessa flinched as if I had slapped her. The hope died in her eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, dark void. "You saw her," I said, my voice rising. "You saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, weeping into a trash bag. You saw her heart break. You saw her shame, and you didn't care. You didn't stop. You handed her a tissue and told her to get out." I stepped back. "You broke her heart, Vanessa, and when you broke hers, you broke mine." "Dad," she whispered one last time. "Don't call me that," I said. I turned my back on her. "Sheriff," I said, "take them away." The sheriff nodded. He spun Vanessa around. She didn't fight. She went limp. The fight was gone. The second click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, sealing her fate. They marched them out. Brad was weeping loudly, dragging his feet, begging for a lawyer. Vanessa was silent, stumbling in her heels, her head hanging low, her expensive white suit now looking like a prison uniform. They walked out the double doors and down the hallway. The receptionist stared. The other lawyers stared. It was the walk of shame to end all walks of shame. The elevator doors opened. They were shoved inside. The doors closed, cutting off the sound of Brad's wailing. The conference room was quiet again. Arthur Sterling walked over to the table. He picked up the Rolex watch that the sheriff had removed from Brad's wrist and left on the mahogany surface. He looked at it with disgust. "It is a nice watch," Sterling said. "Pity it cost him his life." He looked at me. "Mr. King," Sterling said, "you are a hard man. I am a just man." "Mr. Sterling," I said, "there is a difference." Sterling nodded. "I will have my lawyers draft a release," he said. "I am dropping any claim against the property. The road is yours. The house is yours. I don't want anything to do with this mess." "Thank you," I said. Sterling picked up his briefcase. "What will you do now?" he asked. I picked up my hat. I dusted off the brim. I am going to go pick up my wife, I said, and then I am going to take her home. Sterling walked out, leaving me alone with Thaddeus. My old friend was packing up his files. He looked tired. That was the hardest thing I have ever seen you do, Eli Thaddeus said quietly. I looked at the empty chair where Vanessa had sat. I didn't do it, Thaddeus, I said. They did it to themselves. I just let gravity take over. Thaddeus zipped up his portfolio. They are looking at 5 to 10 years, Eli. Fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse. The district attorney is going to have a field day with this. I know, I said. Will you visit them? Thaddeus asked. I walked to the door. I looked back at the room one last time. The shattered glass, the spilled champagne, the ruins of a celebration that never happened. Maybe one day, I said, but not today. Today I have a date with my wife. We walked out of the building. The sun was shining on the streets of Atlanta. People were walking to lunch, laughing, living their lives. They didn't know that a tragedy had just played out 40 stories above their heads. I got into Thaddeus's car. Take me to the motel. Thaddeus, I said. He started the engine. She is waiting for you, Eli, he said. I nodded. I pictured Beatrice. She was probably sitting by the window praying. I couldn't wait to tell her. Not about the arrest, not about the handcuffs. I wanted to tell her that the road was open, that the gate was closed, and that nobody was ever going to make her cry again. As we drove away, I looked at my phone. There was a text message from Vanessa, sent right before the sheriff took her phone. I am sorry. I deleted it. Sorry doesn't open the gate, Vanessa, I thought. Sorry doesn't buy back the tears. We drove on, leaving the city and the jail and the children behind. We were heading north, toward the lake, toward the peace, toward home. The November wind coming off Lake Lanier has a bite to it, but on the back porch of the house I built, the coffee tastes hotter and the blankets feel warmer. It has been 30 days since the storm broke. 30 days since the handcuffs clicked in that high-rise office. 30 days since the silence returned to my mountain. I sat in my rocking chair, the hickory wood creaking a familiar rhythm. Next to me, Beatrice was pouring Earl Grey tea from her favorite china pot. The pot she thought she would never see again. The pot Vanessa had thrown into a trash bag. Beatrice's hands were steady now. The trembling was gone. She looked out at the water, watching a heron stalk a fish in the shallows. She looked like a queen who had survived a coup and reclaimed her throne. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. After 50 years of marriage, silence isn't empty. It is full of conversation that doesn't need words. We just listened to the house. For a week after the arrest, the house felt restless. It creaked and groaned as if it were purging the bad energy. The ghost of Brad's cigar smoke lingered in the curtains until Beatrice washed them 3 times. The scratches on the floor from the movers Vanessa had hired had to be buffed out. I spent days walking room to room, tightening screws, checking hinges, reclaiming the space. I touched every wall. I whispered to the timber. It is okay, I said. They are gone. You are safe. And now the house was breathing again. The heartbeat of the home had returned. I looked down the long, winding driveway. The steel stake was gone. I had pulled it out the day we came back. The neon orange line I had painted on the asphalt, the line that had stopped a multi-million-dollar deal in its tracks, was fading. The autumn rains were washing it away, turning it into a faint scar on the blacktop. The gate was open. I had installed a new electronic gate just like I promised, but today it was open. Not for realtors, not for developers, but for friends. Thaddeus was coming over later for dinner. He was bringing steaks and a bottle of bourbon to celebrate the final dismissal of the civil suits. Arthur Sterling kept his word. He dropped the claim. He realized that fighting a man who owns the road is a war of attrition he couldn't win. But not everyone was celebrating. I took a sip of my coffee and thought about the news I received yesterday. Brad was currently residing in the Fulton County Jail, awaiting transfer to a federal facility. His bail had been set at $500,000, the exact amount he stole. He couldn't pay it. His friends, the ones who drank my wine and laughed on my deck, didn't pick up his calls. The Porsche was repossessed. The penthouse deposit was forfeited. My lawyer told me Brad spends his days crying. He tells the guards he is a victim. He tells them his father-in-law tricked him. He still doesn't get it. He thinks he lost because of a technicality. He doesn't realize he lost because of a character flaw. He is learning the hard way that in prison a Rolex doesn't tell time, it just tells everyone you are a target. And Vanessa. My heart gave a painful squeeze. A father's love doesn't just turn off even when the betrayal is absolute. I drove into town yesterday. I didn't tell Beatrice. I just said I needed gas. I drove past the Burger King on Highway 53. I saw her through the window. She wasn't wearing a white power suit. She wasn't carrying a $12,000 Hermes bag. She was wearing a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big. She had a hairnet on. She was wiping down a table where a toddler had spilled a milkshake. She looked 20 years older. Her shoulders were slumped. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed away by the harsh reality of minimum wage and public defender fees. She is out on bail pending trial, but her license to sell real estate has been suspended. Her assets are frozen. She is working to pay for a lawyer who has already told her to take a plea deal. I watched her for 10 minutes. I saw a customer yell at her because the fries were cold. I watched my daughter, the girl who wanted to be a queen, take it. She nodded. She apologized. She went back to the kitchen. I wanted to go in. I wanted to save her. That is the instinct. That is the curse of being a parent. You want to fix it. But I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I didn't unbuckle my seatbelt. If I went in there, if I wrote a check, if I saved her now, she would never learn. She would think that tears and apologies are a currency that can buy forgiveness. She would think that consequences are for other people. So I put the truck in gear and I drove away. I left her wiping tables. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than building the house, harder than facing the shark in the boardroom. But it was necessary. She wanted to know the value of $1. Now she knows. $1 is worth exactly 4 minutes of scrubbing grease off a plastic tray. I looked back at Beatrice. She set her cup down. "What are you thinking about, Eli?" she asked softly. "I am thinking about the leaves," I said, pointing to the trees. "They are falling. Winter is coming. We have plenty of firewood," she said. "You chopped enough for 2 winters." I smiled. I reached over and took her hand. It was warm. The skin was paper thin, but the bones underneath were steel. "We are going to be okay, Bea," I said. "I know," she said. "As long as we are here, as long as we have the gate." I looked out at the lake. The water was perfectly flat, a mirror reflecting the blue sky. It looked peaceful, innocence, as if it hadn't almost swallowed us whole. That is the thing about nature. It doesn't care about your drama. It doesn't care about your money. It just is. It endures. Just like us. We are the survivors, Beatrice and I. We come from a generation that fixed things when they broke instead of throwing them away. We darned socks. We repaired engines. We stayed married when it was hard. Vanessa and Brad came from a generation of upgrades. If they didn't like the phone, they bought a new one. If they didn't like the spouse, they found a new one. If they didn't like the house, they sold it. They treated people like disposable commodities. But people fight back. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. I leaned on the railing, the same teak railing Brad had disrespected with his cigar ash. It was clean now. I had sanded it down and re-oiled it. It felt smooth under my hands. I looked directly at you, the person listening to this story. You might have a Vanessa in your life. You might have a Brad. People who look at your gray hair and see weakness. People who look at your silence and see senility. People who think that because you move slow, you can't think fast. They are waiting for you to die so they can take what you built. They are circling like vultures waiting for the lion to close his eyes. Let me tell you something. Don't let them. Do not mistake the silence of the old for weakness. We are quiet, not because we are tired, but because we are calculating. We have lived through wars you only read about in history books. We have survived interest rates of 18%. We have buried parents and friends, and we have kept walking. We know where the bodies are buried because we dug the graves. Vanessa thought she was playing chess. She thought she had the queen. She thought she had the board controlled. But she forgot one rule, the most important rule of the game. Never play chess against the man who built the table. I didn't just beat her. I dismantled her reality. I took the very instruments she tried to use against me, the law, the paperwork, the trust, and I turned them into a cage. So if you are listening to this and you are thinking about underestimating your elders, think again. We are the gatekeepers. We hold the keys. And we are not afraid to lock the door. I turned back to Beatrice. "More tea, honey?" I asked. She smiled. "Yes, please, Eli." I poured the tea. The steam rose up into the crisp air. The house stood silent and strong around us. The road wound through the trees, protected and private. The lake sparkled in the distance. We were home, and this time we were staying. Checkmate. Greed is a fog that blinds you to the cliff's edge. My daughter looked at the home I built and saw only dollar signs. She didn't see the sweat, the love, and the legal fortresses I built into the foundation. She thought power of attorney meant power over me. She learned the hard way that authority is borrowed but ownership is earned. Never underestimate the generation that built the world you take for granted. We know where every nut bolt and loophole is hidden. Honor your parents or life, and the law will humble you. If this story of justice and holding your ground resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who crossed the line? How did you handle it? I read every single comment. Until next time, protect your peace, watch your paperwork. And remember, the architect is always watching.